I have a friend that she's kind of the opposite as me, where she's hyper neurotic and like hyper focused, and then she describes herself as though she has like she has an internal persona. It's almost as though she consciously understands her split brain. So she has one part of her that's telling her what to do, and then she says, "Oh, when this part of me tells me what to do, then I just have to do it." And so anything I tell myself to do, then I do. And for me, I'm the exact opposite.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
like my internal brain is a trickster god or something, and then anything I tell myself to do, I can like perfectly weasel right around it,
Yeah.
and then justify that I didn't do it.
Yeah.
Until 3 days later, I'm like, I got myself again.
Oh, you got to do this. Oh, unless you can put it off until this day and then just do it in this 3-hour time span. If you get this done early enough and you go to the grocery store, yeah.
And I always persuade myself that it makes sense. Like I persuade myself, oh, actually, the highest priority thing I could do right now is actually to be on Reddit for like 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And I'm totally not going to be on it for more than 10 minutes, and that's fine. And then 3 hours later, I'm like, I got myself again.
Yeah.
Tricked.
It's 3 a.m.
Yeah, exactly.
Hello again. Welcome to Grokking Points. I'm Travis.
I'm Alex.
So today we're going to talk about Sarah Jeong, like everybody else is.
Jeong.
Yeah, Jeong.
She's not French.
I'm
She's
gonna,
Korean.
I'm gonna zh that J this entire time.
Jeong. Sarah Jeong. It's like Jean. Jeong.
Do we have anything before that though? What did you listen to this week?
Oh yeah, so most of the conversation these last couple weeks have been about Sarah Jeong, so that's going to be a thing. But there's a bunch of interesting podcasts I listen to as well. Coleman Hughes, who is a writer who's been getting popular on this new site Quillette, which is kind of like maybe like a more conservative or centrist version of Vox. It's a new media company.
I see it as like kind of a less libertarian Reason.com.
Yeah, it sounds about right. I mean, they don't really talk about politics, whereas Reason is more. I mean, Reason is like politics and culture, and Quillette is mostly culture.
Yeah.
But anyway, so Coleman Hughes is this Columbia student who is also just happens to be a really good writer, and he's been getting popular on that site. And so he talked to Glenn Lowry and John McWhorter on their podcast about issues about race in America, especially with the Black population. And as a Black writer / university student at a liberal university, he has some thoughts on that, which are kind of interesting. And then, of course, social media has been blowing up about Alex Jones, because Alex Jones has now gotten banned from everywhere. So we can, except for Twitter, we can talk about that a bit. And then we've got Ben Shapiro challenges Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez to a debate. She refuses. Candace Owens gets involved. That's its own hubbub. I have some thoughts on Paul Ryan that I'd like to bounce off of you. And Sacha Baron Cohen's show is really good.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we're going to talk about that for sure.
Yeah.
How many episodes of that have you seen?
I've not seen any of them.
What?
However, I have watched many of the most prominent clips on YouTube and seen them discussed in the Reddit comments.
And that's all you need in 2018.
Right, yeah.
From any show.
Exactly. Just the highlights. I just want the highlight reel.
Okay. How about Coleman Hughes? You saw both of those? The one on Sam Harris and the one on Glenn Lowry's show?
Yeah. So the two main podcasts were this. One was an interview a conversation where Sam Harris was interviewing Coleman Hughes, and that's relevant because Harris got in some hot water several months ago talking about race issues with Charles Murray and then later Ezra Klein, and then he was like, maybe I should talk to a Black person about this.
Interviewing a Black undergraduate that agrees with him, that'll solve everything, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was slightly a strange decision, especially since he previously said that he didn't want to talk to
Ta-Nehisi Coates.
Yes, he didn't want to talk to Ta-Nehisi Coates because he didn't like the optics of him, a white guy, talking to a Black person about race. But then he ended up doing it Coleman Hughes anyway. But I mean, all of that being said, I think it was kind of a silly decision.
He didn't like the optics of disagreeing with a Black guy about race.
Right, yeah, right. Okay, yeah, that's right. So that was a silly decision, and Harris was roundly criticized by his fan base on Reddit for that. But that being said, I actually like the episode itself a lot, and I like Hughes a lot. And I'm interested to see where he goes with his career, because, I mean, he's pretty young, but he's also clearly pretty intelligent.
What do you think about there's a pretty common take on this from the usual suspects on the far left. The idea that any kind of token minority who speaks up against, the popular issues of their own ethnicity is immediately pounced on by the center left and the center right as a kind of banner flag to wave, and be like, see, we're not racist. We've got this guy.
Right.
So
like a I have a black friend.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, this is like the highfalutin version of the I have a black friend argument. So I mean, what do you think about that?
Well, I think that it could. I mean, that's a valid argument in some contexts. Like, it's not like, the reason that argument gets the I have a black friend is not an excuse for racism argument. The reason that gets invoked so often is that it's a fair argument. Like, if something that you say is racist, you can't fall back behind this moat of I have a black friend or a black person agrees with me to claim that it's not racist, right? That's not how racism works. No matter what your definition is, whether it's about discrimination or about systemic oppression or whatever.
Yeah.
That's just not how it works. But that being said, it also doesn't work the other way, which is to say, if a black person agrees with you, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're tokenizing them. You could just actually agree with a black person, or a black person could actually be conservative on some issues.
Yeah.
And so I think the problem with the left's invocation of this reasoning is they pretty much always say, like, oh, if you're black and you're saying something conservative, or if you like Trump, or if you don't think that you're a victim, then you're basically just internalized your oppression. That's the only explanation for it. You can't just have ideas on your own.
Yeah.
And so I think this is why recently we saw Candace Owens got somewhat popular by spreading this message of, like, if you're black, it's okay for you to be conservative, and everyone telling you that you can't, or that it's just you're internalizing your oppression, you're a victim, or you're an Uncle Tom or whatever. That's just a way for other people to control your thoughts and, like, tell you what's okay to think or not think. And that itself is its own form of, she said, she has this catchphrase like, get off the plantation, but in this case she's talking about the left, or like liberal groupthink. Like she couches it as a form of mental slavery, where people force you to think in a certain way, and if you think outside of that way, then they punish you. And they say, if you want to be part of our group, or if you want to even be part of humanity, like in our moral circle, you have to have liberal opinions. And especially since you're black, because we need you to be owned by progressive politics, basically. And so there's some backlash against that. And then we saw this with Kanye months ago as well, where Kanye basically said a couple of pro-Trump things, and then the entire internet exploded because his fan base is mostly liberal, or he has a large liberal fan base, I should say. And then, like Chance the Rapper said, black people, it's okay. Black people don't have to be Democrats or something.
And then immediately apologized.
Right. And then immediately was forced to apologize. And all his friends were texting him like, Chance, are you okay? Like, have you been going to Klansmen meetings? You said black people don't have to be Democrats. Like, do you have a fever? Like, did you take some PCP? Like,
well, I mean, if you think that all conservative policies are by definition racist and oppressive, then it makes sense that if a black person has conservative, racist, oppressive policy views, then yeah, they have internalized what was the word?
Internalized oppression.
Okay, yeah, internalized oppression. I feel like there's because like the sexism analog is internalized misogyny. So isn't there another like
internalized racism?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, internalized oppression, that's a blanket term, so you can use it for all of that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, this is just another symptom of the division problem. There's no possible way that our political opponents could hold the views that they hold. The only reason that they could possibly hold them is because they're racist. Yeah, we've heard this game before.
Right, or they're moral monsters, or they've been, they're drinking the Kool-Aid, that sort of thing. Yeah, and it is frustrating. And one of Coleman Hughes's arguments, which is he's written some social science pieces basically where he has looked into the data of like why black education gap, wealth gap, income gap, stuff like that. And so he's talked about this at length. And one of his, I think, is like one of the most interesting arguments here is that if you just poll people only on their political or like economic opinions, and you ask, or sorry, you just ask them about policy opinions, but you don't ask them about political opinions, then black people are Black Americans are like 50-50 conservative. I mean, not exactly 50-50, but it's close. There's a lot of conservative blacks on policy itself. Then when you ask them, what candidates do you support? It's like 90% support Democrat candidates that wouldn't support the policies that they think that they support. Or sorry, the Democratic candidates are not supporting the policies that the ideologically conservative black population doesn't support, but they support the politician, presumably because, a combination of Democrats are better at marketing towards the black population, or that Democrats have shown that they are, they've gone to lengths to show that they're not racist, and the Republicans haven't done that super well.
Yeah.
And so
there's probably some kind of repulsion action going on here where, what kind of groups are affiliating themselves with the Republican side here. And it's the groups that are not historically friendly to the black community.
Right, exactly. It's like even if, and I have no idea the numbers here, but even if like 5% of the Republican Party had some like pro KKK or like white nationalist sentiment, if you walk into a party and 1 out of the 20 people there is a terrorist, you're probably not going to hang around at the party, right? So there's probably, I agree that there's some aspect of that where I'm sure there's tons of black conservatives who wish they could support the Republican Party or like would want to support those policies, but just can't in good conscience support those politicians or something like that, or they can't support the wider moral or like ideological positions that are also held by actual KKKs and Nazis,
right.
even if it's a very small portion of the polity. So anyway, I thought that was a great discussion. I definitely recommend the.
What did you get out of it
with Harris.
Specifically?
Well, with Harris, I thought the interview. So there's two interviews. There's the one with Coleman Hughes and Harris, and then the other one with Glenn Lowry and John McWhorter, who are black college professors. And so I think the conversation with Glenn and John was a lot more. It was deeper and it had more unique content in it. And I thought that was a conversation that's not had very often. Like you usually don't see 3 black people in a room together, like talking. Sorry, not see, but hear. You don't usually hear this kind of stuff where there's 3.
I see it in my head when I'm listening.
Yeah, I guess so. There's highly educated, highly articulate, and intelligent black conservatives. That's the rare part. Talking about how the left has gone too far, or how identity politics is like not the right way to go. Because usually when you're hearing podcasts like this, it's liberals talking about what it means to be black in America and like all the struggles that go along with that. And which is, fair enough. But I'm just saying that was an interesting type of content. The interview with Hughes and Harris was much more like kind of a typical news interview where Harris was asking Hughes questions and Hughes was just explaining the stuff that he wrote about that you could just go and read. So I think that podcast could just as well be replaced with going and reading Hughes's pieces in Quillette or wherever else he's writing. I think he also wrote for the National Review or something. I think he's written for other conservative sites. But the main thing that I was surprised about actually is because I had read some of Hughes's articles and I liked them a lot. But I just assumed, well, he's a young guy and he's probably specialized in that. And I didn't expect him to do very well in an audio format or like a conversational format. But he was very professional. And he basically kept up with Harris, who has been doing debate for like decades. And he's an undergrad. And so I thought that was really impressive. He
was pretty articulate.
Yeah.
It's easy to listen to.
I've been, I realized about 2 minutes ago that I keep using the word articulate. And there's this whole baggage around that word.
Wait, what's the baggage now?
So the baggage is that it's apparently considered racist in some way or like a microaggression to refer to a black person as articulate, because the association is that like back in the day, people thought that black people were either stupider or they used like slang and lingo or like ebonics in a way that they didn't sound like proper, Southern aristocrats or something. And so to say that a black person was articulate is to say like, oh, you're totally not like a black person because you're talking like a white person. That's a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, I could see that if there's like zero chance you would ever call somebody using what's the proper word for ebonics?
Is ebonics not the proper word?
No. That's like retarded now. You can't say that at all.
Oh wait, really?
Yeah.
I thought that was like an academic term.
Yeah, but it's like retarded. Like it shifts out. Like it.
That's retarded. No, I see what you're saying. Like like the word is academic and then it gets used to be derogatory.
Yeah, exactly.
And then it has to be switched to a new academic word, and then you rinse and repeat.
Yeah, we need a more specific. Okay, it's African
American.
American.
Jive talk. Is that okay? What?
It's African American Vernacular English.
Well, is that like abbreviated or something? It's way too long.
AAVE. So yeah,
I mean, can you at least get it to like 3 syllables?
If you
phonics was 2. Okay,
like,
whatever.
So I can get that. I get that argument if. Are you counting the syllables?
It's 13 syllables. They increased the syllable count by more than a factor of 6.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Anyway, continue.
Yeah, so no, I buy that argument though. If you would never call somebody using African American vernacular English articulate, but like I don't think that's the case with most people talking in this space. I think like somebody like Michael Eric Dyson has some of that, and he's super articulate.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think my thing about I didn't realize that there was this baggage until about a year ago, because there's a top upvoted is on the front page of Reddit. Basically, there's a newscaster or a meteorologist who was talking about weather, and he was a black weatherman, but nobody on the face of it seemed to care that he was black. And he was basically explaining how this hurricane, it was back in hurricane season where there's a really bad one, I forget what it was called, and he was explaining how the hurricane was like moving through the Caribbean and like all the different places that it could go, and it's a very complex topic, and he spent like 5 minutes basically explaining the weather patterns of hurricanes and how we could, predict where they're going to go. And he explained it in a way that was both technical, but also accessible, which is very difficult. And so this is why it got to the front page of Reddit, was because it was a great video and he did a really good job. And it was just a small town weather, local news guy. So people didn't expect, it's not like he was, actually, I don't remember. Maybe it was on a bigger network, but I just remember that it was very impressive. And I watched and I was like, oh, that was a great video, upvote. And then apparently the title of the Reddit post was like very articulate weatherman explains hurricane physics or something.
Yeah.
And then everyone in the comments was like, oh no. The top comment was, oh,
You've
this comment section is going to be fun. And then the rest of the comments were just like, deleted, downvoted, like super controversial, where, half the people were saying, oh, great video, I don't see anything wrong with it. Yeah. And then the other half of the people were saying, like, how dare you call this man articulate just because he's black? Like, how did you not recognize the severity of this microaggression? And I mean, fair enough, but like just now you didn't know that this was a thing.
Yeah.
And I didn't know this was a thing about a year ago. And maybe this is just because I don't talk to enough aggrieved black people to realize, and fair enough. But
that's because you don't call them articulate, you call them thugs, right?
Yeah, Jesus. 99% of all people are not articulate. We are not articulate. We say like and we use bad words, and we like get caught saying really stupid things all the time. And this guy Hughes, again, he was on this podcast. He's on one of the top podcasts.
He's 22.
Ever. Right, he's 22. He's an undergrad. He's on one of the top podcasts ever with a professional like writer / debater / speaker / podcast.
And he's more articulate than most of the people that show up on that podcast.
Right, exactly. And so that's incredibly impressive. And it's like, okay, fine, just make up a different word besides articulate, but that's the best word, okay? Like, anyway.
So Alex Jones, what happened there?
Alex Jones. So I'm sure if you're on social media at all, you've heard about this because there's a big story. But basically, Alex Jones was banned from a series of different social media platforms, and it's not. I don't know the mechanism of this, like whether he was first banned on YouTube and then Facebook was like, oh yeah, we might as well ban him as well. But I think he was banned from YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. There's a round of places.
Most
that he
recently
was banned
Vimeo.
From. And Vimeo, right? Because he left after banned from YouTube. He tried to set up on Vimeo, and then Vimeo stonewalled him. And the main prominent social media platform that he wasn't banned from was Twitter. And Jack, the CEO of Twitter, wrote a whole post about that. Basically denouncing Jones's views and saying, oh, we don't agree with any of this stuff, but the simple fact of the matter is he hasn't violated our rules, and we should be consistent across the board. We're also not going to ban far leftist radical tweets that have not violated our rules. And so then that gets into an interesting question of, are the other places where Alex Jones was banned from, did he violate their rules and that's why he was banned, or is he banned just because just like indiscriminately, like they said, you know what, we're just tired of Alex Jones. We're gonna, we don't want him on our platform.
Yeah, I didn't see a statement from anybody, but Vimeo. Vimeo released a statement saying something like, we don't agree with this. We don't want this anywhere near our platform. We don't want to support this financially.
So that was purely, arbitrary by the Vimeo. Like, it's not like they were just dispassionately enforcing their rules and he happened to violate them. They just said, no, we don't like Jones.
Yeah. Oh, and okay, so at the top of this, we should be clear. None of this, this is like bordering on a free speech conversation. None of this has anything to do with what the government should be doing about anybody banning Alex Jones. Like, Alex Jones does not have a right to be on any platform except for the one that he sets up himself.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the only legal issue that could pop up is if Jones decides to sue any of the platforms, and he may have grounds for civil suit depending on the nature of, if he had contracts with them or something. Like, and I have no idea how, for instance, how the YouTube associate program works or anything.
Yeah, so there's no basis for a discrimination suit because political viewpoints aren't a protected class.
Right. And regardless if there was any sort of like legal or constitutional question about any of this, we would certainly be unqualified to discuss it.
Yeah.
But we're qualified to just shoot the shit about cultural topics. So,
yeah, and I mean, we're qualified to talk about what belongs on Twitter because we're on Twitter and we're a part of that platform. And
we're relevant stakeholders.
Yeah, who's supposed to be talking about, what belongs on these social media platforms and what's healthy to have on there and what's healthy to remove.
Yeah, and I mean, I think for the most part, the left, there's two main liberal or like left-leaning arguments that I'm seeing about Jones. One is Jones sucks and we don't want him, so we should just ban him. And it doesn't even really need to be defended because obviously Jones is, harmful and an idiot and all of the other things you could say about him. So let's just ban him and get it over with. And the other argument is like, we don't want to just ban everyone that we don't like, but Jones in particular has a certain brand of, misinformation slash, what would you call it? Like exploitation of ignorance, and he likes to rile people up. And there's all these other reasons why Jones in particular is somebody that we should ban because to your point, he makes the discourse on the media platforms he's part of unhealthy. And because he compromises the entire platform, that's why we should remove him, not just because we don't like him as a person or we don't like his, political views. And so I think both of those are reasonable arguments. The first argument of just ban him because we don't like him, to some degree, social media platforms should just do whatever. And even if I don't like that, then I can just stop using the platform. If I don't like that YouTube banned him, then I can use a different video platform besides YouTube. Just turns out that YouTube is good at all this other stuff, and that's why I stay with them. But my personal preference would be ban people that are violating the rules. If they're not violating the rules, just keep everyone on there. And if there's stuff that you really don't like, then obviously it's up to you as, anyone using the platform can just unfollow them or not pay attention to their tweets or hide them or block them or whatever it is. Or sorry, not just tweets, but also YouTube videos or Facebook groups or whatever it is. And so I think that that would be my personal opinion as a consumer, as like a cultural commentator. It's less clear to me whether or not this is a good thing.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, my immediate reaction is that this is just the kind of stuff that fuels the divide even more, because like what the best case scenario here, I mean, the only case scenario is Jones isn't on any of these platforms anymore, so his fans have to go to his platform to get to his content, and the only change is like his fans aren't getting less of his content because they know where to get it. So the only change is that the people who don't agree with Alex Jones no longer have any direct access. So now the people who don't disagree with the people who disagree with Alex Jones aren't interacting with the people who don't disagree. And less interaction is less productive.
Well, I think there's the effect of, okay, you're effectively marginalizing his audience because you're saying, okay, you can't be on these like big platforms that everyone is using. You have to go to, either your own site like InfoWars or some like tiny whatever site wants to host you. And so there's the marginalization aspect of that where consumers of his content are removed from the main platform and are forced to the smaller one. some consequences of that are that the positive consequence from the perspective of the people banning Jones is that the main platform is now made healthier. The people that would otherwise be exposed to Jones content and sort of, corrupted by it or fed misinformation or whatever that is, they don't necessarily have to be fans. They could just be people that occasionally see his stuff pop up in their feed and listen. And, maybe they watch one InfoWars video a month and are like mildly sympathetic to stuff that he's saying, or like, oh, interesting, I didn't know that there was a child sex ring in this pizza shop. And so or like, oh, didn't realize that Sandy Hook was a conspiracy, so that's good information to know, and then they tune out. So I think that that's the positive effect, is that with him removed, those passerby basically are not going to be corrupted by his influence. Now, of course, the other effect of that marginalization is that the people that are now forced to that other platform, they're not getting the main discourse. So they're not seeing, like, they're not going to be exposed to any counter arguments. The bubble effect that already is present on social media is now exaggerated even more when they're not even on the same platform at all. Like, there's one thing of being on a platform and having algorithms curate content for you, but now you're just on Jones's platform and he's curating 100% of the content for you. That seems like a bad idea, to collapse this to a more local, personable example. Say that you figured out that your cousin was part of a gang or something, and you're like, oh, I don't want my cousin to be involved in that gang, or like, I don't like the gang. And so your solution is to say, okay, let's move all the gang out of town, including the cousin, and now we don't have to pay attention to them anymore. And then, of course, your cousin and the gang, now being out of town, are probably just going to become either more violent, or they'll have to resort to more criminal activity to get by. Instead, what you would want is like, oh, how can we help out this person? How can we get them like back into the fold, into the community, rather than excluding them? Yeah, I don't know. I guess I agree with you then that this is kind of fueling the fire. Like, I cannot imagine if a supporter. Oh, yeah, that's right. Somebody said this on a podcast. Someone made this point of the absolute. Oh, maybe it's Philip DeFranco. The absolute worst thing you can do to a conspiracy theorist is to actually start a conspiracy against them, because now all of his viewers are like, oh, he's getting banned from all these platforms.
We're right the whole time.
Right, exactly, we're right the whole time. Where there's smoke, there's fire. Obviously, the like liberal media, the big tech companies, the progressive,
the pizza
elites,
restaurants,
the pizza restaurants, the progressive elites on the coastal elites are the Jews are conspiring against us. They're like, banning us from all the platforms. They're shutting down the information. If the information was actually false, why not just let that come out through, open public discourse? Obviously, he's like onto something because he's getting shut down by the powerful elites. And that's very compelling. Like, if you didn't actually know anything about what Jones was saying, you might have that impression.
why is everybody shutting this guy out? Maybe he does have something to say.
Yeah, and that has its own fears that inspires in me of, what if this just makes the alt-right / far-right like globalist conspiracy theorists just more emboldened, and like grows their base and makes it, more and more incensed and more motivated to, like, if they can't go through traditional channels of like just listening to the radio or tuning into YouTube and hearing this stuff, then maybe they have to actually take it to the streets. Maybe they have to organize physically. And again, they're not going to be exposed to the counter arguments or disagreements or evidence or whatever it is that might get them out of this conspiracy bubble. If that's what they're in.
And the more you section off these people and their concerns and their arguments, the bigger a demand you create for their own platform. So 2 or 3 years ago, we didn't have all of these little conservative, like ultra far right conservative publications like the
Daily Stormer.
Yes, shit like that. It's always like some combination of like the Washington Post Times, something like that.
Oh, I see. You're talking about the actual fake news type stuff from a couple years ago. So
the more you section these people off, the bigger a demand you create for those kind of sources. And so suddenly they don't have to consume the news that we consume anymore. Now they can just consume their own news, and it turns into this feedback loop where they do get bigger and more organized, and they start creating, rallies and buy torches and
So one thing that happened at the same time, I think this actually happened on the exact same day that Jones was banned on all these platforms. Oh yeah, that was the interesting thing too. Jones was banned across these platforms on the same day, which makes it, or maybe not literally the same day, but within a very short time period. So it does beg the question of, was it orchestrated? Like, did people talk to each other and decide that they were going to ban him on the same day?
Mm.
Was it like one platform banned him and then the others just
Yeah, it
sort
might have
of
just broke the
like,
dam. Like they
right,
all were thinking about it, like, oh, if somebody else does it, then I don't want to be the first one.
right.
Yeah.
And then was it like in response to some particular piece of content? My understanding was no, because it'd be one thing if he like uploaded a video of him having sex with a pig or something, and
Yeah.
everyone's like, oh, let's just ban him.
Or I mean,
in
just like
response to this.
another Sandy Hook type conspiracy. You
Right,
probably
exactly.
could have done it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I didn't think it would actually. It'd just be. What I was going to say is that. Yeah. It's not even bestiality. It's just the same. Actually, that's really disgusting to pigs. I'm sorry, pigs, that I would associate Alex Jones with you. But so around the same day, what's his name? Gavin McInnes was also banned from Twitter.
Is that how you pronounce his name? I thought it was McKines.
I
could be
McInnes
wrong.
just sounds more Irish to me. I'm not. I have no idea. I'm going to call him McInnes. But anyway, so here's the interesting note: was that Jones was banned everywhere but Twitter. McInnes was banned on Twitter, and arguably McInnes is like substantially more mild than Alex Jones.
I couldn't figure out what he actually did.
He didn't do anything.
Gavin.
So here's this is what I'm going to go into because I'm actually confused about it, and I think that you also don't know about this, so we're both going to be confused together.
Okay.
But the main thing I know about Gavin McInnes is that he co-founded Vice Media, which is obviously like that's a significant thing. I don't think he's part of it anymore. And then he a couple years ago started this like conservative / like chauvinist male club called the Proud Boys. So my understanding is they're basically a boys club where guys just get together and hang out, and like ideologically speaking, they're generally conservative and they're generally like pro America / pro Western culture and values. So that started like a few years ago, and then there started being a bunch of drama because basically Proud Boys it grew. There's a large following because McInnes, I think he was popular on YouTube or something, and I think the main thrust of this was boys. The people who were members of it were tired of getting shit on by liberal media for being men, basically, and they're like, there's nothing wrong with being a man, and like masculinity is fine, and like Western culture is fine, and so we were Proud Boys. But then there's in a Venn diagram, there was some overlap there with actual white supremacist groups or like neo-Nazi types of like, let's take all the brown people and get them out because we're proud of of white people. That overlap existed, and then it culminated in the fact that one of the organizers of the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville a couple years ago, or was that a year ago, claims to be a former member of the Proud Boys. And so the liberal media saw that and they drew this association like, oh, the Proud Boys are organizing, they're like part of the alt-right and they're organizing these neo-Nazi rallies and stuff. And then McInnes said, oh, no, that's like, he's not one of our guys. Like McInnes denounced that organizer. But I think that, the issue here is just, it's a huge group. Like there's a bunch of people all over the country. It's like totally distributed because it's just basically fans of this cultural movement on YouTube for the most part. So it's not like, they have chapters and stuff, but it's not very hierarchical. It's not like a fraternity. And so it was almost guaranteed to happen that some of these guys were going to be idiots no matter what. Yeah. And of course, like people who were already having white supremacist or nationalist leanings were going to be more inclined to join this club. And so now the drama is, and I think part of the reason why McInnes was banned from Twitter and possibly connected to Jones being banned from the other platforms, was that McInnes, as the founder / leader of the Proud Boys, he's implicated in this. And so like on the SPLC, they define the Proud Boys as a hate group, like a white supremacist hate group. And then McInnes is their leader. So he's like a white supremacist leader. And then McInnes is like, no, this is just like a conservative club. Like we're not white supremacists, but he cannot escape that association, and the Proud Boys themselves can't either. And then this recently came up in the Bay Area, like locally, because I live in Oakland, and I'm right by the BART station, and there was a stabbing a couple weeks ago, and it was a white man fatally stabbed a black woman and injured her sister, I believe, on the BART. And there was rumors, which they ended up being unsubstantiated, but there was rumors that he was affiliated with the Proud Boys, and the Proud Boys were having like some sort of white supremacist rally, like on the day of this dead black woman's vigil. And then so like a bunch of like Antifa type counter protesters showed up.
Yeah, I read like one or two articles, and they just kind of threw the Proud Boys, like they just kind of name dropped them
Right.
somewhere in the article for seemingly no reason. I couldn't find any source that they were actually like what they were showing up to. Like, were they showing up to the vigil? Were they, walking by or like?
Yeah, it was very confusing. So much of this hubbub happened in like a day, and I think this was before McInnes was banned from Twitter, but it was only like a week before. So this may be tied into all of it. And I'm sure the people at the Twitter office were like aware of this happening because they're from the Bay Area, or a lot of them are from the Bay Area. Twitter's, headquarters, I think, is San Francisco. And so this particular event was actually is like an the Donald Bay Area Reddit meetup. And so someone had posted on the Donald Bay Area group, hey, we want to meet up at this bar on this day. And I don't think they even knew about the stabbing. It just happened to be on the same day of this vigil. And then so somebody like shared that on Facebook, like they got word of it, spread it around. They're like, oh, obviously this is a white supremacist group meeting to antagonize people suffering from the death of this black girl. And obviously they were like part, the white stabber was part of it, which it turns out he totally wasn't at all. There's absolutely no evidence of it. But then this like bubbled out into media. People are sharing it on Twitter, like, oh, we've got a counter protest. Even the mayor, Libby Schaaf, I think, of Oakland commented on it. And she said, to her credit, that there's no evidence at all that this assailant was affiliated in any way, that it was a hate crime, nor that he was affiliated with any white supremacist groups. But she went into, she said that in a sentence and then devoted 3 sentences to talking about how she's against racism and oppression and against white supremacist groups and how we need to be careful about hate and everything. Anyway, but this wasn't even the Proud, and I think she name dropped the Proud Boys as well, or some news outlets did. And yeah, to your point, they didn't seem to be affiliated at all. And at most, it was like, this is the Donald meetup group. And what I'm getting at with all of this, like telling the story about McInnes and Twitter and the Proud Boys, and I've been personally confused because I looked into the Proud Boys and I tried to figure out if they actually were a white supremacist group or not. And it's reasonable to think that if they were, they might not just publicize that everywhere. Like, it would be hard to really say, I wouldn't expect to go on their Facebook group and then just says gas the kikes everywhere. But the fact that like I couldn't figure that out easily, like I tried Googling around and I saw, it's a nuanced issue because I saw some people saying that, oh, here's examples of white supremacists or like organizers of the Unite the Right rally that claim to have been Proud Boys. But then here's the founder of the Proud Boys saying that we're not related to them. And I couldn't tease out that information. And I wanted to go to the media and like have real journalism explain this to me. And like, I want to understand that. But I realized at that point that I couldn't trust the media explanations. Like, I couldn't trust the information sources that I had been used to because all of these different people were just saying, like, I'm used to the guys that I follow and I know absolutely are not white supremacists, just being called Nazis and racists and everything. And so if the media, if the SPLC will call Majid Nawaz a anti-Muslim extremist, how can I trust when they say the Proud Boys are a white supremacist group or a hate group? I can't trust that anymore.
I know they're I mean, like, throwing a dart at the wall, they're probably anti-feminist, male chauvinists, like the kind of people that
they say that they are that.
Like,
but they're not misogynist, they're anti-feminist. They don't like feminist ideology, but they're not like anti-women.
Probably we would disagree with a lot of the things that they talk about, but yeah, it is incredibly irresponsible to just be name dropping them in articles about black women being stabbed on public transportation. Like, how irresponsible can you get?
Like, the stabber was a boy. And he was white, so he must have been proud. So and they had a meeting somewhere in the area in recent history. So it must have been.
This is my one per show allotment of this is why Trump won. This is why Trump won.
Right. Yeah. And I heard about this from my friends as well. So it's not like I'm separated from this. My like inner network of like people in my house were talking about this issue as though it was just like obviously true that white supremacist groups were getting together and like roaming the streets and stabbing people. And that's something that we need to be concerned about, and that there's like a Nazi invasion of the Bay Area. And I was like, I want to be mad at the people for spreading this false information, but they got it from information systems that they trusted. Like, they heard it from their coworkers. They saw it in their Twitter feeds. Like, they just saw this information. They thought, oh, well, everybody's talking about how the Proud Boys organized this event, and it's the day of this, vigil from this stabbing. Obviously, there's some relationship there. And they should think that, because they're getting that from information systems that they trust.
Yeah.
And there's no
that's
other
like
way
explicitly the narrative that was drawn there.
Yeah.
This is worse than baseless fear mongering. This isn't even like just baseless fear mongering about E. coli in your vegetables. This is like directed at a specific group of people.
Right.
This is a perfectly crystal clear example of the kind of things that ratchet up our divisiveness.
Right. This just in, there's been an E. coli outbreak among Proud Boys, and any contact with any Proud Boy that has danger of you getting E. coli. So don't
unless
invite
you
them to
punch
dinner.
them first.
Yeah. That's the inoculation.
Punching is the cure.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so what I'm seeing here is that this is basically a mass, like a large scale institutional boy who cried wolf phenomenon.
Yeah.
Where this was a situation where I actually wanted to trust. Like, I wanted to trust the media, and I wanted to get information that I didn't feel like I could validate myself. I mean, surely this is why media exists, right? Because like people can't just independently verify all this information. And so I found myself like they had cried wolf on white supremacists and Nazis so many times that now I didn't actually know if this was a real white supremacist group or not. And that's what I want to know.
Yeah, I want to know what groups are white supremacist Nazis.
Right, and I
that's
want to
really
know,
important information.
Right, and I want to know if they're infiltrating the Bay Area and like going around and stabbing people.
Yeah.
And like taking over our bars and stuff. But as far as I can tell from this, it's like there's like a group of people that just met to talk about how they like Trump in a bar in the downtown of a big city, and just happened to be a few blocks away from the vigil that's happening that's totally unrelated to them. Mm-hmm. And they get implicated in that. Do you think this is going to change the Trump supporters' minds? Oh, and then of course, there's a video on Twitter of one of these guys was like attacked by a mob in an alley and like beaten. And then everyone on Twitter is like, oh, thank God we like punched the shit out of that Nazi. And no one obviously no one on Twitter has any idea who this person was or why they were attacked. They just assume it was deserved because the people beating him up were black and he had a red hat on. So like obviously it was fine. And sure, maybe it was. Maybe he was a racist asshole who started something he shouldn't have. But I have no idea. It's just a random video on Twitter. And again, it's just this implication of like, yeah, where there's smoke, there's fire. It's not even real smoke. It's like a smoke screen that someone else has put up. And they say, oh, well, we might have caused this smoke, but it's like we put it over there and there's probably fire and we should go get those guys. It's definitely concerning. And like, it's double concerning. One, because I want to have these trusted information streams where I could actually know who are the real white supremacists.
Yeah, this is like our local news. Like, we don't have an alternative source for this.
Right. And then, of course, the other problem is what if there's a really nice club? Like, what if these were cool guys I'd like to hang out with? And then, I mean, I'm not saying that they would be. Like, to your point, I probably wouldn't enjoy it very much. But I have no idea. I've never, been to their meetup and just talked to them and seen what they actually think. And I think this is true for Trump supporters broadly. Like, I don't know how many times I've talked to my friends, like my sort of liberal Berkeley bubble friends, and they say, oh yeah, I couldn't be friends with a Trump supporter, or like all Trump supporters are racist, sexist, sort of thing. And then I actually meet a Trump supporter and they're like incredibly nice people that don't obviously have a racist bone in their body. And I mean, you can't see me over the podcast, but I have brown skin. And I went to, this past year, I was invited to a New Year's party, Christmas party in this cabin in this small conservative town in the mountains. And I'm pretty sure at least 70% of the people there were Trump supporters, probably more. And it was all white people. And I was the only brown person in the room. And I had never been there before and they didn't know me. And they were super nice and hospitable. And, they fed me amazing food and we had a great time, just drinking and shooting the shit. And I was like, if my liberal friends were just talking about these people in a dispassionate way, they just say they were all sexist bigots and they're not worth the time of day, right?
Yeah. Well, what? Okay.
Racist is what I meant.
Let me push back. I want to move on soon, but let me push back on this just a little bit and see what you think. So let's say that every Trump supporter is how you describe, and we know that's not the case.
Well, yeah, sure, surely. I mean, the whole point is to not generalize, right?
Let's say every single Trump supporter is the kind of people that you hung out with in that cabin, and on a personal level, they're totally amicable and friendly and not explicitly not racist.
Right.
But let's say we live in a world where they also all supported objectively racist policies. Like, this isn't the case, but what if they all, wanted to bring back segregation?
Right, like literal Jim Crow type stuff.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and they sat there and they told you about their policy ideas, and they're like, well, yeah, I just think this makes the most sense, and they're explaining it calmly and rationally, and they're talking about how they got to that position from their a priori principles, and like, what is it still fair to say that they're not racist?
Well, I think what's fair to say is that, I mean, maybe again, this goes into how you define racism, which we can talk about. How I think you read an article like sort of going into the weeds of how different groups are defining that term.
Yeah.
But and we can talk about that. But I think the more important question is, what do you do about that situation? Because the prescription of like wall those people off and then put them as beyond the pale and like don't accept them into your communities, don't be friends with them, don't talk to them, they're like just pure evil as far as we're concerned. That is not a prescription I'm willing to take. I mean, I admit I'm somewhat radical in this view. Like I've said before, that if I was in a room with Richard Spencer, I would debate him. I wouldn't fight him.
Yeah.
And I'd be happy to do that. And I understand why most people would not be happy to do that. And he's like a more extreme example of this. But if I see someone that, and I've had friends, like sometimes friends believe shitty things, or sometimes they say shitty things. Sometimes you say shitty things and you don't know. And the only way you can know and figure that out is to talk to people and to like really get to know them and meet them where they are and say like, yeah, I can see how you got to this position and I understand why you support these things, but I think that's flawed and wrong. And I think it'll hurt these people. And this is why. And I think that, people will listen to that. Like people will listen to you if you come to them where they are. If you say, I'm better than you, you're like not worth talking to, you're obviously an idiot, you're obviously a bigot, and you shouldn't even be invited to the table, then of course they're not going to reciprocate.
Yeah, because that confirms their preconceived notions about you.
Yeah, sure. And even if they didn't have preconceived notions about you, now this new information is like, oh God, I don't want to talk to this person. I'm not going to believe what they say. They won't even listen to me. So why should I listen to them? And of course, that's the case. Why should you listen to someone that's not going to listen to you? This wouldn't work in a face-to-face conversation. So why would it work, across oceans and across, internet connections?
Yeah, I mean, I think the far progressive viewpoint here is that all of these conservative policies are so far beyond the pale that there's just no compromise to be had. We can't even condone like the 10% version of their policies.
Well, we can't even condone like talking about it with them.
Yeah.
We can only talk about it with us. And this is something tangentially that I was going to bring up, where I've been listening to The Daily, which is a New York Times podcast where they just do like a daily sort of digest of what's happening that week or whatever. And it's, it's pretty good. It's like, it is partisan, but it's pretty like objective, and I trust that the reporting of the facts is accurate, and they bring on experts and ask some questions and stuff. And it's a nice digest of information you can get in like 15 to 20 minutes in your morning commute. But it's very frustrating because I've been following this now for a couple months, and literally every single episode and every single topic is like anti-conservative or like pro-liberal in some way.
Yeah.
And they don't make any pretense about this at all. They're not like Ben Shapiro is more fair than them in terms of how he will like play both sides of liberal and conservative, opinions, or like pro or anti-Trump opinions and stuff. But he's like explicitly conservative. He's like, I run a opinion podcast, a conservative opinion podcast. He markets it as like, this is the, fastest growing conservative podcast in the nation, right?
And the fastest talking.
Yeah, fastest talking conservative podcast in the nation. And the New York Times doesn't do this. They're like, weird news that you can trust. This is the important stuff to know today. By the way, conservatives are evil. And like, this is all the information we're going to give you. And of course, if every single day on your morning commute, you're just hearing another story about how some conservative politician did something bad, or how QAnon is like attacking people, or about how there was some like backroom corporate lobbying to Republican politicians, or the NRA did something bad today. And it's just like over and over again, even if all of those things actually are true and they're backed up by accurate reporting with experts, like it's clear, like the bias is just, it's not even obvious. It's like, it's self-evident. Like there's not even any way you could argue against it.
Yeah, I've been feeling a little bit this way about NPR for a little while. It's the only like actual non-new media news that I consume now is just NPR radio, like on my way to work or whatnot or whatever. And I feel pretty similarly about them. They try to present both sides, and I've actually heard criticism from leftists saying that they present both sides too much.
Right.
Like they play like this radical centrist role. Except if you actually listen to their shows, like 75% of them are culture war things. So it's always like, the experience of minority groups and then like discussion on that. And the conservative viewpoints that are brought up aren't like, Jonah Goldberg or like David Frum's ideas. It's like some caller on forum calling in and going like, well, actually, I think they deserve to be, left at the border and separated from their families and all. Like it's not like it's not an actual opinion. It's just some dude. And then they have these liberal elite professors on there to explain the progressive side in like very calm, rational terms.
Right, of course. Yeah, and it's, I mean, both sides do this to an extent, but if you assume both sides are doing it equally, it still doesn't make it okay. And I don't know if they are, because I don't actually follow that much conservative media. But like the fact that these are the prestigious organizations, like this is not InfoWars, it is New York Times, it is NPR that are doing this is like somewhat damning. Like, I don't listen to NPR that much, and I do like NPR. I mean, that's the thing, too. It's like, I like these outlets. Like, they do a good job of reporting.
Yeah.
Like, they have calm, soothing voices.
Yeah, the stories are great to listen to.
But they just, like, why can't they just do some other stuff?
I agree with, like, probably 90% of their opinions, too.
Right.
Like, I like all of the takes that they present, pretty much. But, yeah, I just feel like I'm listening to one side of the conversation.
Right. Yeah, and I wouldn't mind at all if they were just, like, we're a progressive organization that is interested in like liberal/progressive values. And I think just the pretense about it not. I mean, this is what a lot of people were saying about Jordan Peterson talked about the difference between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump in the 2016 election. And he was saying people were presented with a choice of systemic, institutional, planned, like designed lies, or they could go with like random chaotic lies. And they decided to go with the random chaos. And they said like the fact that someone would get up and just make this pretense of like being really nice and cuddly and like on your side and gonna do everything to help you and was given a script about this and then you knew it was a lie, that somehow felt worse than someone who was just like clearly off the handle and just saying whatever he felt like at the moment.
Trump is obviously actually like he's actually talking like people talk. He's not talking like a robot.
Right.
Trying to, say the most politically expedient thing at any given. He's doing the exact opposite of that.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's morphed into something else now where people have sort of been forced, like a person who was previously a Trump gredder or like a mildly on the fence person that just broke on the side of Trump because they felt like it was two bad options. Now I think a lot of those people have been pushed into Trump supportery because basically because the left side has just like totally stonewalled them and, cast them out as bigots and people who have like ruined America. And then of course the right, like the Trump supporters, it's kind of a party over there. Like they're having a good time. Yeah. And they're saying like, oh yeah, it's cool if you kind of like mildly thought about supporting Hillary. Like the important part is that you're part of our team. Yeah. And this goes back to the conversation we had about civility, where even when Democratic presidents are elected, conservatives still say that they love America. And with Democrats and liberals, it seems to be a lot more contingent. Like if a Democrat is not in office, then a lot fewer people say that they love America. And I think that is reflected in every time a Republican president gets elected, half the liberal media just starts shitting on the other half of the country and talking about how America sucks. And it's because half the people voted for an idiot. But if only 48% of the people vote for the idiot, then we can kind of ignore it and just talk about how great the Democratic president is for the next 8 years or so.
Yeah.
I don't want to go too far in this because I acknowledge that this happens on both sides, but it frustrates me so much more when it's on my side.
Yeah.
And when it's the stuff that I like is getting compromised by it.
Yeah. Okay, so AOC, you've got something on that?
Sure. So Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has been the subject of we've talked about her a couple times on this podcast, and she comes up quite a lot in media these last couple months because she's kind of the face of the progressive movement at this moment, like literally the face because she's a young female minority face, so people use her as a symbol, but also like politically because she's she was meeting with Bernie Sanders and she's sort of making the rounds. And and she's showing up on she's being interviewed, she's making guest appearances, etc. And so Shapiro has been sort of tearing her to shreds because she keeps showing up on interviews and like making public statements where she just kind of rambles and doesn't really say anything interesting, and people just kowtow to her. Like they don't really challenge her on stuff. A rare exception to that was that interview with Margaret Hoover on Firing Line, where she got challenged on the question of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But for the most part, she evades this, and progressives are sort of just sucking up to her and heralding her as this, progressive idol. And so Ben Shapiro, the like conservative idol in a lot of ways, has been tearing her to shreds on his podcast. And at some point, he offered to debate with her. He said, "I'll offer you $10,000 to debate with you. You can come on my show, or we can host it by like an independent third party if you're not too scared," basically. So she refused this. I'll bring up the tweet. So Ocasio-Cortez, she doesn't respond to Shapiro directly. What she does is there's some random guy on Twitter who added Ocasio 2018, and he says Ocasio 2018 refuses to respond to Ben Shapiro's $10,000 debate offer. And so I think that Ocasio-Cortez probably doesn't even follow Ben Shapiro at all. But she responded to this tweet, and she says, "Just like catcalling, I don't owe a response to unsolicited requests from men with bad intentions. And also like catcalling, for some reason they feel entitled to one." So obviously she's saying that Ben Shapiro offering to debate her is like he thinks that he's entitled to a response from her, and he's like sort of yelling at her from the sidelines and expecting her to like deign to interact with him. And she's not even interacting with him. She's responding to some like random dude on Twitter no one's ever heard of who has just added her. And I'm sure that that was intentional, that she didn't respond to Shapiro directly because she didn't want to even be like sullied by his existence. And this is a very popular tweet. This has gotten 35,000 or close to 36,000 retweets,
wow,
and 192,000 likes. I didn't realize that this was even so big, but this is not obviously she's very popular right now. There's some agitation around this. Some people were saying she's right to shut down Shapiro because Shapiro is acting in bad faith. Obviously, this is generally the liberal position. Conservatives were saying she's afraid of a debate. She knows that she won't be able to beat him. He's smart. He knows what he's talking about. He's a lawyer, and he actually is educated on topics of economics or politics, and he's just going to blow her out of the water. So she's just afraid. Other people are pointing out that, and Shapiro pointed this out as well, that comparing him challenging her to a debate of ideas, comparing that to catcalling, is not taking seriously the idea of debate itself, and is saying that like, how else are you going to hash out differences of opinion between people? And to compare that to catcalling is just ridiculous because, everyone sort of agrees, and especially conservatives agree, that catcalling is a bad thing. And Shapiro pointed out this irony by saying, like, I'm an Orthodox Jew who believes in no sex before marriage. Like, I don't objectify women. That's not the thing that I do.
Yeah.
If anything, I do the opposite, where I say that it's okay for women to be like protected and held sacred. And so that has then generated Candace Owens, who is kind of friends with Shapiro, and she's a prominent conservative Black woman, had sort of called out Ocasio-Cortez, and she raised the stakes. She said, "I'll actually challenge you to a $20,000, or I'll pay you $20,000 to debate me." And I don't even think Ocasio-Cortez responded to that. But Candace Owens is very similar. Like, she's very outspoken and aggressive, and she holds herself very well in conversation. And I think she would probably challenge Ocasio-Cortez as well, who's a little bit more of like, she's not nearly as polished. And you can tell from her interviews that she's not practiced at debating, and she doesn't have many of her points. Like, she both hasn't rehearsed them in a way that she can present them articulately, but she's also not, she doesn't have the backing to like explain her policies. So for instance, she was asked like, how are you going to pay for your universal health care plan, because she's been advocating for universal health care in the United States at the federal level. And then every time she's asked it, she doesn't give any numbers, she doesn't give any idea of like budget or whatever. She's just like, well, we've taxed people before and we can just tax them more. We already spend so much on other stuff. Of course we could spend much more on this. And Shapiro really digs into her for this. Actually, I'm thinking maybe I should find this clip.
What I love most most, I think, what I love most is that she says that, we've never had to worry about spending this sort of money before. The kind of money that she's proposing spending is so insane that it makes what we have spent before absolutely obsolete. According to the Mercatus Center, a libertarian-leaning center at George Mason University, they estimated that Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All plan, we talked about this last week, would cost the government $32 trillion over the next decade. But we can actually do a budget exercise using nonpartisan and even left-leaning groups. Vox.com, a left-wing source, they talk about what exactly we would have to pay for single-payer healthcare, a jobs guarantee, and free college. What exactly would it cost? Well, it turns out that it would cost, according to the Tax Policy Center, it would cost legitimately trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars. $42.5 trillion in new proposals over the next decade, on top of the $12.4 trillion baseline deficit. To put this in perspective, according to Vox.com, Washington is currently projected to collect $44 trillion in taxes, in revenues, that's what they call it, over the next decade. Okay, the Republican tax cut, the fiscal Armageddon, will cost less than $2 trillion over the next decade. So we're going to spend $44 trillion, but Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez says the real problem is those tax cuts that quote-unquote cost $2 trillion. What is the 30-year projected tab for these programs that they're talking about? The 30-year projected tab is, I kid you not, $218 trillion on top of an $84 trillion baseline deficit driven by Social Security, Medicare, and the resulting internet costs. Federal spending, which is typically between 18 and 22% of GDP in the United States, would soar past 40% of GDP on its way to 50% of GDP within 3 decades. And she says, oh, well, we've never had to worry about spending before. Well, it turns out if you quadruple the spending, you might have to worry about it a little bit more. You got a $10,000 credit card debt, and then you decide to rack up another $40,000 of credit card debt. Maybe you ought to think about whether the original debt was a good idea, but quadrupling it is an even better idea. Okay, we'd be at 60% of GDP by that point. Okay, within 3 decades. State and local government spending would push the total cost of government, according to Sanders and Ocasio-Cortez, all the way to 60% of GDP. 60% of every buck made in the United States would be spent by the federal government, exceeding the current spending level of every single European country. And this is their big idea. This is what they think is going to win them elections.
Yeah, okay. So we don't need to talk about that whole thing.
Yeah, so I think there's a few different questions here. I mean, I don't think I agree with everything Shapiro says there, of course. I mean, to spend a couple seconds on military spending, I think if you include Veterans Affairs, like the total spending on military and the armed forces is something like a quarter of the budget, something like that, and it's like half of the discretionary budget.
Right.
And
well, it's not a coincidence that usually when people are trying to talk about how big the spending is, they only talk about the discretionary budget.
Yeah.
As opposed to like what is the proper like way to compare. But yeah, I mean, you point taken on that.
Yeah, and then there's arguments you can make like, well, we spend so much on healthcare because people can't afford it and they get sick and then they go to the hospital and then we have to pay for their treatment anyway. And so we've got this giant ballooning healthcare budget. And if we just kind of did away with this system and just gave everybody free healthcare, it would cost less in the long run, theoretically. Yeah, I don't know how to make the best argument for those things. And I don't think Ocasio-Cortez does either. And I don't necessarily know that that's even her job, is to do that. I mean, politicians now, their job is to raise money for their side. And that's what she's good at doing. And I think I understand why she wouldn't debate Shapiro, because it's like all upside for him. There's no possible way that it could go badly for him. Like he could like spend the entire time just ad hominem shitting on her, and his audience would still probably be fine with it, and Ocasio-Cortez's fan base would still hate it. Like,
right.
I don't think it would make a huge difference. Well,
I think the reasoning behind it is not like the actual debate itself matters. It's that what is the signal behind it? Like, because I think a week or so ago, Noah Smith, who is a economist / I think he writes at Bloomberg, he said, okay, Shapiro, I'll take you up on that. I'll debate you. He's an actual economist.
Yeah.
And so I think the idea there is that I'm sure Shapiro knew before even offering that she wouldn't actually take him up on the debate. But the point is, if she offered to him, he would take it up in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
Because his point is like, I'm not going to back down from a challenge. If any liberal or any progressive challenges me to a debate on the things that I'm like talking about all day, every day, this is my platform, I'm gonna defend it, because that's like my job, is I'm gonna defend my ideas. If they don't stand up to a debate, or if I don't stand up to that debate, then I failed. So like he is absolutely not going to back down from a challenge. It doesn't have to be with her in particular. In this case, he is at the higher position in the sense of he has nothing to lose. But
Yeah.
if it was somebody that was like much more prominent that was going to debate him, like Elizabeth Warren or something, you could say he would have something to lose from that if he actually lost that debate. But I'm sure he would actually take that up if that's what he was offered. And I think it's a good thing in the culture to encourage people to have debates like this. Like, I want to see it happen. Like, whether or not it would actually be good for Ocasio-Cortez to do it is like, I don't care about that. What I want is I want the debate to happen, and I want to be able to decide which arguments are better or not.
Yeah, I mean, I'd much prefer, like, personally, I'm glad that she denied it and then Noah accepted it or gave that challenge. I think Noah is in a much better position to debate Ben Shapiro than Ocasio-Cortez is, because I mean, he's a real economist, and Ocasio-Cortez just has like a bachelor's degree.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it wouldn't just be about economics. I mean, presumably it'd be about like politics or culture or whatever stuff that Shapiro would normally talk about as well.
Yeah.
But I mean, she is. I mean, to your point, you said earlier, it's not necessarily her job, or it shouldn't be her job to like craft the numbers of the policy. But she's the advocate. Like, she is the champion. Like, the people have. Imagine like you're watching Game of Thrones and you're going to like, you have to pick your champion that's going to fight to defend you. And the left picked her. Like, she is the champion.
Yeah, but Ben Shapiro isn't running for public office.
He might,
if
Ocasio-Cortez
refused to debate a political opponent, then that's one thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, in that case, she doesn't even have the option because they would have to debate if they were facing off against each other. But yeah, I mean, that's fair enough. She's not doing that. So, you can't criticize her on that basis. So from her perspective, Shapiro is just kind of like a random guy in the street catcalling at her. Yeah. But I mean, Shapiro is among, if not the loudest voice in conservative podcasts in America right now. I mean, in terms of his competition, it's like people on Fox News like Sean Hannity, and then people who've had radio shows for decades like Alex Jones and Rush Limbaugh. But I would say that those people are not treated with respect, and nobody listens to them. But people do actually listen to Shapiro, and they follow the Daily Wire, and he talks to prominent people. Like he talked to Paul Ryan. He recently had an interview with Mike Rowe. He's not fringe, and I think that while I agree that Ocasio-Cortez shouldn't necessarily have debated him, I think that those are the types of debates that we should want to see. And I think it should be a positive signal in the person we support that they will take up debates from like the leaders of their opposition.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that part of the reason why she would not take the debate is because she knows that she would lose. If she thought...
Well, she knows that there's no upside. I mean, Ben Shapiro's like highly practiced at this. He's literally a lawyer.
Right.
Yeah, he's been doing, talk radio essentially for years and years and years. Like you're never gonna stump him.
Sure, but I mean, to your point earlier, he has those qualifications, and he's not running for political office. She's actually going to be deciding the laws, and she is the representative of the people. Sorry, I guess she hasn't actually been elected technically yet, but when she gets elected, she's the representative of the people. She's going to be in like the Congress arguing for and against policies. Like if she can't beat Ben Shapiro, who's not even doing any of that stuff, how is she going to represent those opinions in that governing body? How she's going to represent it to all of the people that she, all of her constituents. And I think that that's the thing is like, if your champion doesn't accept challenges like that, not because it's not worth their time, but because they would actually lose and like they know it, that's a bad signal to me.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Ben Shapiro, his literal job almost is to be good at arguing with leftists over talk radio.
Right.
Whereas that's not AOC's job. Her job is to promote the policies that her constituents want her to promote.
Yeah, and I mean, like you said that it is
irresponsible. She would be doing a disservice to her own constituency if she went on the Ben Shapiro show and just got trashed for an hour.
Yeah, and I think that I've focused too much on her as a person because I actually really don't care about her as a person that much. I think really the question is about the constituency itself and what they want. Because it's true, they don't want her to debate him because they don't want debate. What they want is to, I mean, not that anybody should like all the time. It's not like an unmitigated good. But I think what they want is they like already have an idea of what they want to see. Like, it's not a question of how do we figure this out? It's like, well, we already figured it out. Let's just get a candidate in office who's going to do it. And I think that's the thing is in terms of the actual policy, yeah, maybe it's not her job or it shouldn't be her job to craft the policy itself. but she should understand exactly how it works. And she should be able to say, this is how this policy works.
Yeah.
This is why we want it. This is why it's better than the other policies. And I've got like all of these numbers to spew out because like, if anything, that should be the easier job, not to actually craft the policy itself, but just disseminate it and advocate for it and understand it. Like she's the communicator, the advocate. Presumably the guys in the think tank that are crunching the numbers all day, they have like the really difficult technical job of crafting the policy. But, you know, it is within her scope to understand it, advocate for it, not spread like misinformation about what its effects would be, not like diminish the costs inherent in the policy. And like when challenged on policy, maybe not by Ben Shapiro, but by, you know, by whoever it is that's challenging her to defend it and say like, it matters for a number to be twice as big as it was or 4 times as big as it was. It's not like, oh, it'll just be more money, but that's fine. Like she's the one who's going to be passing the laws. Like it totally matters what the impacts of those policies are going to be. And this hand waviness of, well, we've paid for other stuff before with other money. So an arbitrary increase in budget.
Yeah, this is
fine.
almost like the comical, like, well, why don't we just raise the minimum wage to $100 an hour? Like,
right, exactly. It's basically like that. Yeah, it's like it's the slope that is the bottom of the slippery slope that people said you wouldn't get to.
Yeah,
and that's, you know, I'm concerned with that because I don't see her constituents saying, oh yeah, that's interesting. Let's see whether her ideas actually do stand up to scrutiny. Yeah. Like let's push them up against like an opposing idea. They're already sold on the fact that like capitalism is evil and that, well, maybe not evil, but at the very least inherently flawed or something. And that our goal should be to be as close to Sweden as possible, or depending on who you talk to, Soviet Russia. And whether or not that's a good idea is not even being hashed out. It's just not even on the table. It's just like, obviously I'm pretty and I laugh a lot and I like, you know, the policies that you say.
Well, now you're catcalling.
It doesn't, yeah, I know. Yeah. Catcalling. Does it count as a catcall if you're insulting an appearance? Like, hey, you're ugly. Like, I don't know, man. Okay, well, that's this week in Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez saying things on Twitter.
Okay. Yeah, join us next week.
Yeah, join us next week. Yeah.
All right. What do we got? You want to talk about Sarah Jeong now?
Yeah, we can talk about Sarah Jeong. That's really the story. That's the interesting story of the last month or so. You've been getting pretty deep on this, you said.
Yeah. So I've got a couple things.
Well, what's the situation? Just describe what happened. Who's Sarah Jeong and why does she matter?
So okay, Sarah Jeong is she's now an editor at the New York Times, right? And supposedly when they hired her, they looked at some of these old tweets that she made and they talked with her about it. And they said, you know, these aren't acceptable. You can't do these. You can't say things like this. And we'll get to the tweets in a second. You can't say things like this while you're on our editorial board. And she said, okay, that's fine. And so they hired her. And then after they hired her, somebody discovered these tweets that she had, to her credit, she has not deleted a single tweet. As far as
it's not like discovered. This was just her Twitter.
Yeah.
Like this was what her Twitter was.
Yeah. So from basically the first few that came out, there's something like a dozen of them. And they were things like, you've probably already heard these if you're listening to this, but so dumbass fucking white people marking up the internet with their opinions like dogs pissing on fire hydrants. White men are bullshit. Cancel white people.
When was this?
This is all from 2014.
Okay. I assume this was when she like first joined Twitter or
she was on Twitter for at least a year or two before this.
Okay, this is just when she started being more active.
Yeah.
And okay.
One more. Are white people genetically predisposed to burn faster in the sun, thus logically being only fit to live underground like groveling goblins?
What pros?
So yeah, these are pretty bad if you just look at these. And I also took a look at another thread was made. I don't even remember who it was by at this point. This drama's been going on so long. But somebody dug up every single one of her tweets where she mentions white people over the course of like from 2012 to 2016 or so.
Right. And
she says like the words white people in something like 20 to 30 tweets a year at least. And from 2014 to 2015, it's like about at least like once or twice a month she has some tweet about white people.
I'm going to assume these are negative tweets.
Yeah, they're almost all negative. Pretty similar to the ones that I just read.
Well, I believe that you can just search it, right? It was like, let me see if I can find it. oh no, but this is going to get all of the atting.
Yeah, this isn't going to work. Okay,
Yeah.
it's fine. We don't need to read all of them.
Yeah.
They're like none of them are as egregious as like the two that I just read, or the couple that I just read, are probably the most egregious. Like they're the most inflammatory. And you know, the controversy here is the Vox.coms of the world believe that this is explicitly not racist, and the right and kind of the center left is saying either it is racist or she should be fired because it's racist, or yeah. So there's a few different disparate questions here, and they're all kind of related but separate questions. There's the question of, should she be fired for this? Because like we just talked about James Gunn the other week, and he got fired for seemingly much more innocuous tweets than this.
Right, further back in time, like 2009 or whatever.
Yeah, he you know, he just tweeted about, you know, jokes about pedophilia and that kind of thing. They weren't directed at a person or a group. Where these are actually directed at a group of people, specifically white people, men, and old white men.
Right.
So
intersectionality.
Yeah. so the whole media hubbub and drama the last few weeks has kind of been about whether these are racist or not, and that's kind of dominated the conversation. And then the kind of sidebar conversation is, should she be fired? Is it hypocrisy if she's not fired? I have a take from Iona Italia.
Okay. Oh, yeah, I know her.
Yeah, she's friends with Helen Pluckrose. They both work at Aereo magazine.
Mm-hmm.
So she says, if you want your cause, any cause, to have credibility, you have to be clear and consistent. Blatant double standards are completely counterproductive. And so she was also responding to another tweet by Matt Jameson, who says, leftists, you will never get the majority of Americans to believe anti-white bigotry is just harmless joking. It doesn't even matter if you're right. You aren't. If you're going to die on this hill, the left will die with you.
Right.
So that was a good take, I think, from Iona. Is that how you say her name?
So this is almost more of a pragmatic argument. It's like, regardless of whether this is right or not,
yeah,
the fact that it's inconsistent is just going to confuse people, and it's counterproductive. You're not even serving your own aims by doing this.
Yeah, I mean I lean towards that, because I'm not like I'm a little bit agnostic about the moral argument here. What do you think? What was your take? We've avoided talking about this.
Yeah, sure. I have a moral and pragmatic argument about it, and we can. There's also a few Vox takes that I think are relevant.
Okay.
Because Ezra Klein, obviously the ringleader at Vox, he wrote a large piece about this, and the main thrust of his piece is that, well, okay. So first of all, it's established, if you don't totally know, although it should be obvious, Sarah Jeong is Asian. She's Korean American, I suppose. And so there's some question about like a minority, quote, person of color talking about white people, and how there's a power dynamic here, and that, you know, explicitly being racist against white people, it's not actually racism, because if your definition of racism is structural in nature, then only oppressor classes can be racist against oppressed classes, or only like men can be sexist against women, and the other way doesn't work. You can't be sexist against men if you say anti-male stuff, and you can't be racist against white people if you say anti-white stuff, because the entire definition of these things is defined systemically and not contextually or like individually. I mean, systemic context, not individual context. And so obviously that by itself is in dispute. But the way that Klein approaches this is, he says, when Sarah Jeong is talking to her followers on Twitter, and she is talking about canceling white people, or, you know, white people pissing on fire hydrants or whatever, she's using language that, whether or not you agree that that's how racism should be defined, that's not the way that she is thinking about it. When she's talking about white people, she's not talking about you if you're white. She's not making generalizations about all individual white people. She's saying, this is like a cultural phenomenon, and I'm just putting the label of white onto it. And so to make that statement is not really racist in the same way that saying black people are inferior is racist, because when you say black people are inferior, you're making a statement about all individual black people. Mm-hmm. That's generalizing.
Yeah, and
she's not doing that. She's just making, you know, she's saying these like quasi-ironic statements that are just critical of white culture, and that's the way that her and her ilk do things, and that's fine.
Yeah, and I believe I believe that that's what she's doing. I'm not like 100% sure whether or not she's actually racist. Like, I don't know her.
Right.
But just like looking at her tweets, and looking at her explanation, like I don't think it's out of the question that that's just what she was doing. And I can understand why she would end up in the situation where she was doing that, because, you know, you make these kind of statements like Breaking Bad is just white people bullshit, and, you know,
oh, Breaking Bad is good. Okay, sorry.
And like, what are the responses you get from that? You get like 10 responses from your leftist friends saying like, you go girl, and then 100
hashtag woke.
Yeah, and then like 100 responses from actual Nazis who are just pissed off because you're talking shit about white people. So like, if that's the only reaction you get from these kind of tweets, then I can understand why you think that you're doing a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that that's actually what's happening, although it's hard to say without... we're not going to Twitter lawyer and like go through her actual tweets. My understanding, especially from seeing similar things posted on like, you know, my friends on Facebook, for instance, is that the criticism is pretty much not there. It's usually somebody posts something like this that's like critical of white people or capitalism or men or whatever. Gets a bunch of likes, a bunch of shares, a bunch of people talking about like how courageous it is that they said it, or how important it is, or important. It's very important. And then if somebody says something that's like kind of like, oh, well, maybe we shouldn't say something about all men kind of thing. And then someone's like, hashtag not all men. Like, this guy's clearly just defending like, you know, white cis male misogyny, like, blah, blah, blah. And I think I'm sure, because that's the culture that I'm observing, and it's the same culture, that's probably what Sarah Jeong is in. She was probably saying these things with her friends. They were supporting her. They thought it was like either important things to say, or at most it was just like neutral stuff that anybody can say and it's fine, because that's just like, yeah, obviously white people suck, like we know this. But obviously we're not talking about you, like you're one of the good ones. You're like, we're only talking about some of your behaviors, which might not even be intentional, or it's like internalized or whatever. It doesn't have to be even explicitly racist if you just support some policy that ends up having some what I determine to be racist outcome. Then you're like a little bit racist, and that's fine. That's just all like let's just all plead guilty, and like we can finally absolve ourselves of sin if we repent.
Yeah, and I buy that like definition of racism. And if we want to shift the definition of racism to incorporate this kind of like systemic injustice and infrastructural biases, that's fine. That's a reasonable distinction to make. But then we have to kind of go back and make sure that racism still isn't the worst possible thing that you can be accused of in this society.
Right.
And have we done that? No, we haven't done that. If you've ever been friends with a racist, if you've ever had a relationship with a racist, if you've ever shared an elevator with a racist and asked them what floor they were going to and pressed the button for them, you should be fired. You should be socially ostracized, and everything you own should be burned to the ground.
Right. Yeah, very strange. I mean, there is this, I kind of said this off the cuff, but there is this, quasi-religious component of it where it's like, if you acknowledge it and like repent for it, then it's okay. So if you say, I realize that I as a, I acknowledge my privilege, and like I as a cis white male cannot possibly understand the inner suffering of Sarah Jeong at the behest of oppressive whiteness
while she was attending Harvard, getting jobs at the New York Times.
Right, exactly. While she's a editor New York Times. And so because I couldn't understand that, then it should be, it's totally fine for her to tweet all this stuff about white people. That's obviously, from someone else's definition, racist. As long as that I can like absolve myself of that sin and I can repent for my own whiteness, then I can be in the fold. I can be one of the good guys. I could be an ally, right? And there's not a lot of in between. It's not very easy for a far leftist or like a devout identitarian to let somebody in that hasn't made this repentance. If you say, oh, I'm not going to apologize for being a white man, but like, yeah, I'll talk to you and listen to you. They're like, oh, whoa, hold up. Let the women speak, you know, like let the people of color speak. Even for you to talk like kind of on our side is not necessarily a good thing. Like, it's not, if you're not trans, don't play us in movies. Yeah. Like, if you're not gay, don't play us in movies.
Yeah, it's almost even worse because, the actual people that legitimately hate you for your skin color, they, at least they're explicit about it. And
they'll tell you to your face.
Yeah. Not like these white allies who only implicitly have some, terrible prejudice against you.
Yeah. I mean, I know that there's Well, sorry, just we could go on a billion tangents about race. So, but to bring it back to Sarah Jeong, you earlier asked me my opinion. Obviously, my opinion is somewhat clear, but I think that this criticism of white people in general and the generalizations that are made and the the obvious lack of nuance and the obvious immaturity, those aren't reasons to like cast somebody out. Like I wouldn't take Sarah Jeong for saying those things and like cast her out of society.
Well, I mean,
I would take her
Alex,
down and say,
as the white person here, I think I'm in the position to decide whether these are racist or not.
yeah, that's true. That's true. You're the oppressed class in in the Twitter verse. But like I wouldn't cast her out. I would say if I knew her, which I obviously don't, but if I knew her, I would sit her down and say like, I get where you're coming from and I understand why you're criticizing this culture, but this is not an effective way to criticize it. Like, it's not going to help. It's not going to change their mind. It's not like fully accounting for the nuance of the situation. Obviously, like there are obviously white men that are not doing hot, and you should acknowledge that and not just say, oh, because they're white people, they clearly have privilege or they clearly suck. I mean, the same generalizations that you would see a white person say about black people, and then you would cast them out, that's the same thing that you're doing in the opposite direction. And yeah, you have to be consistent if you're going to get this message across. And so like the type of thing that I love is like this guy, I forget his name from the top of my head, but this guy, he's a black musician or something. I think he plays guitar and sings. I don't remember exactly, but he went down to the South and he found KKK members and like reached out to them and then made friends with them and basically showed them like, hey, I realize that you've probably not even met a black person in your life, or like the people that you have met are, the people from the other side of the town that are poor, or there's like a higher crime rate or something, so you have a judgment about that. And so I'm going to talk to you and like show you my humanity. And so he actually, and there's a documentary about this on Netflix, he actually made friends with KKK members and like got them out of the KKK. They were like, oh, I didn't realize that black people could be cool. Like I actually did just think that they were all like violent monkeys. And now you like came and talked to me and like extended the hand, and I can see, I can sort of see the light. Like I see that I was misguided before. And that's how in my mind, that's how you create progress. You take your enemy and you say, okay, like what's our common elements, like what's our common humanity, let's find that and acknowledge it and work together. And that's like what, as far as I can tell, that's what the liberal project should be all about. Like that's what progressivism should be about. Like the people that are pro-immigration, pro like civil rights, pro multiculturalism, this is how you achieve that. And I think that Sarah Jeong's not just her as a person, but like this culture, this like call out culture of just like constantly generalizing about white people and men and straight people and rich people and blank people. It's like the whole reason that this was bad in the first place is because the generalizations are bad. And like the whole reason why we shouldn't cast someone like Sarah Jeong out is the same reason why you shouldn't just cast a KKK member out. You can cast out racism and you can cast out segregation. You can cast out the ideas, but you have to get buy-in for that. You have to go to the people that believe them and say, like, this is why you shouldn't. Like, this is the common humanity that you need to acknowledge. And Sarah Jeong is just like, it's the equivalent of fighting fire with fire. She's like, oh, well, all the racist white people did this, and so now I'm just going to be racist against them.
Yeah,
and like, revenge is the right way to go.
I kind of see this almost as like the remnants of a time in America from like 2005 or like 2000-ish to 2008, which coincidentally is the runtime of the Comedy Central show Mind of Mencia. There was a time.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah, I used to love that show.
There was a time where it was okay to make racist jokes as long as you were kind of making fun of everyone and everyone was in on the joke.
Or yourself.
Yeah. So, and then we kind of realized that, okay, well, that's still just not productive. Like, you're still just going to get people who aren't in on the joke, or they're taking the joke more seriously than you are. And so we kind of forgot about Carlos Mencia and we left him in the cultural dust. And what was left of that is this idea that, okay, well, it's okay to make these kind of jokes as long as they're directed at the oppressor class.
Right. Like,
we can't make them about everybody, but yeah, it's fine because we're not harming anybody. And I get that, because I don't think that any white people were directly harmed by Sarah's tweets.
Well, what is direct harm? Like, by that definition, nobody could ever be directly harmed. Well,
okay, so like if you make a like a racist joke on Twitter, and somebody who doesn't know you sees it, and they just see like a white dude making a racist joke on Twitter, there's a consequence that's possible there where that joke kind of brings up bad feelings about how they were ostracized or othered in the past or how they're being othered now. And it brings up all of these historical political events that we've only just recently kind of shaken off as a country, where there's no analog to that for white people. Like there's no.
Well, I don't know if that's true though, because I mean, well, that is the claim, and like I agree that that's the claim that other people are making. But I mean, well, first of all, the entire issue that I see with it isn't that you shouldn't mock oppressors. The issue is that you don't know who are oppressors and who are not.
Yeah.
So the problematic point is to take a group of people like white people, which obviously like that's a huge group of people that's totally diverse, and to say that's one group of people and they're all oppressors is just ridiculous, because the people that are hurt, maybe they don't feel the same sort of like victimization complex, but the people that are hurt by these tweets or these ideas being spread are people that are like poor or sick or just lost a job in truck driving or manufacturing or whatever it is, and they feel that the deck is stacked against them in a different way. From their perspective, the oppressor class is like elites, people that are wealthy, people that are well connected, people that went to university,
like Sarah Jeong.
People like Sarah Jeong, exactly. And so from their perspective, somebody who has the time and inclination to sit all day tweeting about how shitty white people are from their like ivory tower, and they still get like a great job at the New York Times, even though they apparently are super immature and don't even write that well. And then meanwhile, somebody makes like a third of the money that she's making plumbing in Nevada. And it's like, what's even wrong with plumbing in Nevada? Like, why should that even be something that's seen as lesser? And the fact is that whether or not she wants to acknowledge it, Sarah Jeong does think, or probably thinks, that people like that are lesser. And part of that is like, to lump that just into whiteness and to say that all people are white are oppressors, like implicitly, is to say that the white plumber in Nevada is an oppressor. It's just an absurd statement.
Yeah.
She's not like saying all kings are oppressors or like all billionaires. She's talking about white people.
Yeah.
And I don't even think that you should say that for billionaires, because there's some billionaires that I like. But I mean, that's the thing. It's just so extreme that even like a very casual interpretation of it that like is as charitable as possible, it's still not something that I would want to do. And she's taking it to the far extreme. I mean, even like whatever she said, hashtag cancel white people, hashtag delete white people.
Yeah.
Can you imagine if she said hashtag delete black people?
Yeah.
Or if anybody on the New York Times said something like that? And then the fact is, like, sure, maybe if you count everything up, on average, black people are worse off in America than white people. But the entire problem with this, the reason that racism should be bad to begin with, is because you can't make generalizations. And so it's just as bad to assume a black person walking into your Starbucks is a criminal as it is to assume that a white person is an oppressor, because you don't know if they're a plumber in Nevada. You don't know if the black person is a Harvard, Columbia graduate or whatever. And so I think that Sarah Jeong et al., and unfortunately et al. Now apparently includes the New York Times, is taking this stance where they just say, no, we don't care. We don't care about being consistent about those standards. In fact, we arguably don't even really care about racism in that way, because if the racism affects the people that, give us political power, then it's a bad thing. If racism affects people in a different political class, then it's totally fine. Who cares? Just make the generalization. Doesn't matter if it's right or not. We can just we can just go back after the fact and say, oh, we weren't talking about you. We're like, oh, this generalization it's totally valid because we're generalizing about oppressors.
Yeah.
And it's morally, in my opinion, it's morally and ideologically bankrupt. Whether or not it's legal or should be allowed on Twitter is to me, not even really that important. It's easy enough for someone to say, oh, this is just like some crazy on Twitter / some writer for some website, and it's not even that important. But yeah, this is the New York Times. This is the culture. This is the source of information. This is the elite class. This isn't some like behavior of, QAnon, these like random guys from their basement. I mean, I don't know how big of a deal QAnon is, but that seems to be the main boogeyman.
We'll have an episode about that at some point, I'm sure.
Yeah, once I actually figure out what the heck it is. As far as I can tell, it's still just 4chan. But
yeah, it's really interesting to see how this is really a good encapsulation of what this culture war is, because the way that this argument is being framed by each side is like night and day. Like the conservatives and to some degree the centrists are framing it like, if this is racist, Should she be fired or not, something like that. And then the progressive framing is like the way they talk about this controversy. I see the phrase faux outrage over and over, which is just, it's mind-boggling, because it's like they're saying that nobody's actually mad about this. Like there's no actual real meat in this discussion here. There's no there. It's just like conservatives getting mad because they always get mad at everything, and it's faux outrage.
Well, the prime argument I was seeing was that this entire outrage itself was architected by like alt-right trolls that were like going into her past and like digging up skeletons in her closet just to take her down, and that it was like some sort of coordinated attack campaign from the right, and that this is not the type of stuff that we should accept. But I mean, you can just go back and look at her history, and she's talking about canceling white people in like 2016. It's not that long
it went
ago.
on for about 3 years.
And then the New York, and again, she works for the New York Times, so it's not like there was some like random stranger in the middle of nowhere that got, it's not like that girl that tweeted about getting AIDS on the plane, and when she landed, her life was ruined. Right? This is not that situation. She's in the commentariat class. Yeah. She is the public voice.
Yeah, and it's so hard it's so hard, like, this is such a weird framing, because it's hard for the Voxes of the world to even describe what's happening here in accurate terms without it just obviously looking racist. Like, you see these phrases like, the way in which oppressed people talk about their oppressors. That's the actual phrase that's being used.
Right.
Yeah. So I want to kind of go into the details on this personal racism versus infrastructural racism argument.
Sure.
And so I've got this paper, this social science paper from 2012 by Carlos Hoyt Jr., and it's called The Pedagogy of the Meaning of Racism, Reconciling a Discordant Discourse.
Okay.
I'm only gonna read one quote here, just because the way that he outlines this makes a lot of sense, and it's a good baseline for talking about this argument in general. So towards the beginning of this paper, he talks about how he describes racism to his classes, and how he asks them what they think it is.
Sorry, he's a professor?
Yeah, I mean, he publishes social science papers. I assume he's taught some classes at some point.
I see.
Yeah, so he asks his students what is racism, and he gets generally like two different answers. And he gets the personal, psychological, like a person is racist to another person or group, versus the infrastructural, systemic racism that's like kind of divorced from personhood, but the way a system can be racist against a person or group. So he says about these two things: awareness of these forms of racism is commendable, and there is nothing mutually exclusive or controversial about these two manifestations of racism. They both root directly and strongly in the false and pernicious idea that people can and should be sorted into subgroups based on arbitrary phenotypic markers, assumed to have attributes that correspond with the markers, valuated on the basis of the possession or lack of possession of the markers, and treated differentially according to those valuations. So what he's saying is that both of these forms of racism have their root in what he calls this pernicious idea. And the pernicious idea is, you look at another person and you think that you notice these physical markers on that person that you can attribute behaviors or judgments to. And then you treat them differently based on those behaviors or judgments that you perceive.
Right. And
so I think it's really useful to look at this pernicious idea as kind of the root of what we should be paying attention to. And, when I said earlier that I don't think Sarah Jeong harmed any white person directly with these tweets, I don't think she did. But what she is harming is our language tools themselves. She's harming our ability to perceive this pernicious idea, right? What she's doing literally is she's justifying the use of this pernicious idea. She's justifying the logic of it. You can look at a person, digest the physical markers on them, and then make judgments about them based on those markers. She's justifying the logic and the rationale of that idea.
So I get that. I'm confused at what then is the distinction being drawn between let's say, individual versus systemic racism? Because it sounds like everything you described, that's the problem with, I don't know, is there an actual technical word for this, like evaluative racism?
We can call it personal racism versus systemic racism.
Sure. Because like the idea of, like, that's the entire point to me behind personal racism, is that generalizations, like stereotypes, are not always right. So you shouldn't use them as the basis for
but she's not looking
decisions.
at it. She's not adding a specific white person and being like at Joe Biden.
Well, yeah.
You're an asshole because you're a rich white dude.
I see what you're saying, but from my understanding of systemic racism, or how, I mean, obviously not everyone uses it the exact same way, but my understanding of how that works is like, if you have a degree program at university that admits people based on their SAT scores, they don't even take into account of race. But then after they're let in, if fewer black people get accepted than white people, let's say because they have lower SAT scores, then that is a version of systemic racism. Because even if they weren't explicitly discriminating based on the race, the outcome was that the system is sort of set up in the way that black people who on average are poorer, therefore they have fewer resources to invest in like SAT prep courses or time to study for the SAT, and then when they actually take it, they get a lower score. So then when the university is evaluating SAT scores, they're, no individual person is being discriminated against, but it's systemically racist because the outcome is that fewer black people are getting into university. And this is the justification, for instance, for affirmative action.
Well, you can make different levels of that argument. Like I'm sure there's people who think that that university is racist because they don't have affirmative action policies. But there's also people who think that, well, no, they're not racist. This is just indicative of a racist system.
Right. But that's what I'm just saying, though, is that the system, like, the reality of more black people are poor, and therefore and poor people have like fewer resources, therefore on average black people have fewer resources, therefore the system is racist. Like, that idea doesn't actually require any intentional discrimination by anybody, which is why I'm saying that, like, the thing that he just described of like lumping people into a bucket by their skin color or by their phenotypes, they say, like their appearance, it could also be, color of their hair or how they dress or whatever it is. To me, that's fully encapsulated by personal racism, like by that definition of personal racism.
Yeah, you're wondering what the connection is, like why is infrastructural racism rooted in the pernicious idea?
Yeah, because I'm saying that the pernicious idea, to me, that's like the entire point of where the idea of personal racism comes from. To me.
I think maybe Hoyt would argue that.
Also, I didn't read the article. Sorry, so I'm just.
I think Hoyt believes that they're connected. That infrastructural racism, systemic racism, is rooted in the pernicious idea. Because if we didn't have this pernicious idea, there wouldn't be a bunch of little implicit biases that kind of conglomerate into a racist system.
Right.
And so, to the degree that the system is racist, it is due to the pernicious idea. And we don't know what degree it is racist or not. Like, we don't know what, in like a perfectly non-racist world, like what levels would all the groups be at? We don't know that.
Well, there's an irony here in the sense that the type of racism that Sarah Jeong is participating in, there's some elements of that, which is what I see as like the only real value in racism, which is that, how do I do this without sounding like an awful human being?
Well, you are, so you don't have to.
Oh, great. Oh, yeah. Okay, good. Now I don't even have to worry about it. Because, so say that's like the week after 9/11, right? And so, like, we know that an Islamist, not anyone who is Muslim, but an Islamist, meaning their intent is to spread Islamic ideology, basically, through violence if necessary. So we know that there was an attack. It's killed thousands of people, it's destroyed families, it's compromised national security, billions of dollars in damages, maybe more, national, worldwide attention. And this was an Islamist group, right? And so it would be, to me, it's actually a reasonable response. And this is the same thing that Ezra Klein was justifying in Sarah Jeong's response. It's reasonable for like the family of a victim to say, like, we need to have stricter checks on people wearing hijabs, or like we need to be worried about Muslim extremists, because it's the exact same logic of like, this is how, quote, this is how the oppressed, this is the language they use to talk about their oppressors or something. Yeah. It's like the person whose son just died in an attack, like a violent terrorist attack from an Islamist terrorist. It's not crazy for them to now have like some beef against Muslims. I'm not saying that it's justified, but I'm saying it's not crazy to have that belief because
it's not unexpected.
Right, exactly. And so I'm not saying that that means that racism is good. I'm saying that the reason is that it's pernicious in the first place is because it's informed by real perceptions by humans. It's not just like illusions that Muslims, crashed a plane into the World Trade Center. Like that happened. The question is, what do you do with that information? Now, what we decided as of 10-ish years ago or whatever, I mean, hopefully even what Martin Luther King decided was that, okay, if you're going to judge a terrorist, judge them because they're a terrorist. Don't judge them because their skin is brown or that they're wearing a certain type of clothing, right? And I think that that's like, to understand racism, you have to understand the reason that it exists, which is not just because people were like born being stupid idiots and they just think things about people for no reason. It's like informed by evidence that they perceive in the world. So the people that think that black people or Mexicans are more likely to be criminals, they like look at the crime statistics and they see that it's true. And so they're like, oh, that fact justifies the racist belief. And they see that, way more terrorists seem to be Muslims than white people. So
this is like the Steven Pinker argument. Like, we're not willing to acknowledge these facts. So when conservatives look at those facts and they realize, oh, I was right the whole time, and nobody's there to tell them, well, actually, here's what those statistics can actually tell you.
Right.
Like, it doesn't actually tell you what you think it tells you, because there's nobody there to provide that pushback. They just go all the way into the alt-right territory.
Right. And so the reason why we create this concept of racism, which up until very recently was always about personal racism, was because if you look at the crime statistics and you see blacks commit a lot of crime, if the response to that is, therefore black people are inferior and I want them out, that's the wrong response. Like that's what we're saying is the wrong response. But it's not wrong because the data is wrong. It's not wrong because the people who publish the data are racists and they're just like tweaking the numbers. It's wrong because it's like not a productive solution to the problem. The solution is something like, okay, what is their background? Why are they behaving this way? Like, why are they more poor than the average person is? Maybe it's based in some sort of historical injustice that's happened. That's like the contribution that progressivism has made to culture, is like acknowledging of those facts. And those are all like relevant facts.
Yeah.
But then like the perfect problem of this ideology is what Sarah Jeong is doing, where she says, this is unacceptable to do with black people, and to do with white people, it's totally fine. Like, you don't need to consider context. You don't need to worry about hurting anybody. You don't need to worry that you're generalizing and like casting a broad brush. The casting of the broad brush isn't the problem. It's just the oppressor, comparison that matters. And I think that just totally misses the point of why stereotyping is bad in the first place. It's not that it's not like factually accurate or that it's based on like these systemic relationships. The problem is that as like an individual person, you need to be evaluated on your merits. And maybe there are systemic problems. Like maybe there's systemic problems with white people. Maybe there's systemic problems with men. Maybe there's systemic problems with Muslims that somehow lead more of them to be terrorists or something. And we can talk about that, but you can't talk about that at the same time as talking about being slightly more worried when crossing the street and there's a black person on the other side of the street. And I think that we have to grapple with in order to create social progress, we have to grapple with the fact that it is true that different groups of people, as identified by their phenotypes, behave in different ways in general.
Or even self-identified.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Because that's how we organize, right? It's all self-identification.
Right, exactly. Like, people that have these different group identities do behave in different ways on a group level. Sometimes these ways can be problematic either for oppressor or oppressed classes. Evaluating someone on the individual basis, you can't take that into account because they might not fit that trend. And in fact, it's very likely that they don't, because distributions generally, overlap a lot more than they diverge.
Yeah.
And so, and this is like Charles Murray's whole argument, which he got in trouble for in the bell curve, which is that distributions are very similar to each other. Like men and women overlap way more than they differ. But on the extremes, like the strongest people are going to be men. That's just like how it is. The people that are best at taking care of children and the elderly, like in nursing homes, they're going to be women. It's not saying that men can't be nurses or that women can't fight. That's not the point.
Yeah, and we don't even have to make any claims about whether those traits or behaviors are even biologically informed or
Sure,
culturally
yeah.
informed. Like we have no idea what percentage is biological versus cultural. We just know that those behaviors are there,
Sure.
and that we can track them statistically.
And that's Murray's argument as well, for
Yeah.
the most part. Like that's kind of the thesis of the bell curve, is that we don't know why these differences exist, but they do, and we need to understand them.
Yeah.
In fact, the not knowing is the important part, right? And I think the Sarah Jeongs of the world are just, they're obscuring this understanding. They're saying even seeking the understanding is wrong, and we can just like be at the same position that we were before, and then just switch the roles. We can just, now that if we're the oppressed class, quote, like because I'm Asian, so therefore I'm the oppressed class, if I just flip that and I have power and I can crap all over white people, then now the problem's solved. And I think that's, we already figured out that that's not the solution, and now we're sort of like culturally backsliding. And I think it's just it's counterproductive, and I don't know how we can really stop it. But I'm not optimistic. I mean, sorry, I am optimistic. I am pessimistic on that ideology itself, like the pure identity politics type ideology.
Yeah.
But I think that we can pave a way forward, and we can have some sort of like reasonable in the middle position, which I think is what we did have for broadly for the last even Carlos Mencia is not even that bad.
Yeah, I mean, like when Ezra Klein, my problem isn't that Ezra Klein and co over at Vox are explaining her behaviors, like, because I buy their explanation of her behavior. Like, I believe that she wasn't intentionally trying to hurt white people, like I buy that this is the language that she was using to interact with her oppressors, whatever. But there's a difference between explaining that behavior and justifying it, and I think what Ezra Klein is doing is justifying it.
Right. I also, for the record, I do think that she actually did intend to hurt white people.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
which is like, I mean, fair enough.
She did intend to hurt some white people. Like, I think those were partially to signal her allyship to her, friends and followers, and then partially to trigger the conservatives,
right,
that she interacted with.
This is going to seem totally random. I don't even know if it's connected at all. But a few days ago, I watched the Lord of the Rings: Return of the King extended cut.
Mm-hmm.
Incredible. Although actually the extended cut wasn't that good. If you're going to watch it, just watch the original movie. But anyway, so there's this interaction. I hope to God, pray to God that you've actually seen Lord of the Rings: Return of the King. If you haven't, please watch the entire series right now. But spoilers, I guess, if you haven't. So there's this interaction where Frodo has the ring, and over time, the ring has this power that it basically just makes anybody who holds it shitty. Mm. And that's why Gollum is so shitty, because he had the ring for this long time. Basically, it like corrupts your spirit, right? And so there's this sequence in Return of the King where Frodo and Sam and Gollum are like a little troop, and Sam is like the purest soul you can possibly imagine, and he's trying to do whatever he can to help Frodo, and Frodo is just getting like destroyed by having this ring, and it gets even worse the closer he gets to Mordor. And so at some point there's a conflict there where Sam is like trying to help out Frodo, and he's like protecting him from Gollum, who just like secretly wants the ring and is just like sucking up to Frodo to get into his good graces. And so Sam is like, clearly this is a really heavy toll on you. I can help you, like I can help carry the ring for like a little while. I could take it off your hands, and I can, help ease your pain. And he's like totally good natured about it. He's like the least power lusting person you can imagine. And then Frodo basically lashes out at him, and he says some like really hurtful things, and he like leaves him behind and like goes off with Gollum. And then Sam is like crying on this like rock mountain and on the volcano in darkness. And then later they like get back together, and Sam rescues Frodo, and then Frodo's like, so I'm so sorry, like I didn't mean it, sort of thing. And the reason that I'm telling this whole story is because what this story is encapsulating is that a person in like, and everyone like understands the story on like a deep like moral and emotional level, like it makes sense to them, because what Frodo's behavior is that when he says that he said these like hateful, sort of resentful things, like defending the ring, which I guess maybe the ring is like his desire for power, his ego or whatever, and it causes him to hurt his close friend. When he says he didn't mean to, he doesn't mean like it was an accident. Like he did mean to at the time say these like hateful, resentful things. But what he actually means is that there's like a higher and a lower part of him, and his like higher purpose didn't mean to. Like he made a mistake by saying something that was hurtful in the moment. And so I think, when you could say something like Sarah Jeong didn't mean to hurt anybody, but I think she is currently in the situation of like having the ring and like being obsessed with the power, and she actually is like just lashing out and being like resentful and hateful, and she does mean to hurt people within the context of her intentional like racist tweets.
Yeah.
But I think like her higher like human spirit, if she could be unclouded from this hateful ideology, or maybe displaced from her position of power, she might not think that way. Or I can imagine her like looking back and regretting this and being like, oh, I didn't mean to hurt those people.
Should have used the ring for good.
Right, yeah, exactly.
What you're missing with this analogy, Alex, is that Lord of the Rings is white people bullshit. So it actually doesn't apply here at all.
Right, and the orcs are like the black people in the story.
I mean, yeah, the real tragedy here is that Sarah Jeong doesn't like Breaking Bad, and Breaking Bad is just an incredible show. And
so what you mentioned was a tweet by her saying that she hated Breaking Bad?
Yeah,
that is a tragedy.
Yeah, I know, right? Like, yeah, she should just do herself a favor and just really like watch it.
Wait, so she didn't even watch it?
I don't know. She says that it's like it's just like white people, emotional white people tears over like emotional white people problems, something like that.
Well, okay, she's Korean. What are you gonna say about Korean soap operas? Like, come on. I mean, like, I love Korean soap operas, but they're like the hammiest, teariest thing you possibly imagine. You're not gonna find a black person in a Korean soap opera.
Yeah,
they're just crying about like amnesia and like their uncle left their
Did you ever
aunt
watch
or something.
Reply 1990 whatever. There's a bunch of those.
No,
my girlfriend's obsessed with those.
What is that?
It's basically How I Met Your Mother, but Korean.
Okay. Yeah, no, I don't know. My dad is like my dad is Korean. He's super obsessed with or he was super obsessed with Korean soap operas. And so I watched a little bit just like by osmosis. Mm-hmm. And they were completely ridiculous, but it was fun. I'm sure that I realize that I'm being racist in the sense that obviously there's no reason to assume that Sarah Jeong watches Korean soap operas, but like that's the thing is, there is no reason to assume that. So why are you going to talk about Breaking Bad like white people bullshit? Yeah. Like everyone likes Breaking Bad. Yeah. Breaking Bad is a great show. You don't have to be white to like Breaking Bad. I mean, I don't know. It's just so stupid.
One of the lines in the Vox article was that, this is just like a faux outrage thing, and we're just going to get over this, and we'll get to the point where nobody will be mad about this kind of thing anymore. Like,
so faux outrage meaning the backlash against Sarah Jeong is not.
It's manufactured.
Okay,
yeah, that's the implication. Yeah, and so like feminists can still say kill all men and like I hate men and nobody really cares about that anymore. So the same thing's just gonna happen with this.
Yeah, I mean this is the worst part about like it's so like short-sighted, because obviously when they say, oh, it's faux outrage, because they didn't really do the research and they have no idea what's going on, the people who actually feel the outrage are like, I know it's not faux. You can't persuade me of that. Like, I know that my outrage is actual outrage. Yeah. So like I can immediately verify that what you're saying is bullshit. Like you don't even need, it's not like you're reporting on some like disaster in the forest of the Congo and I'll have no way of ever knowing.
Yeah, well, I mean,
I know that it's not faux.
I think the Vox perspective is that like it's faux outrage because like, oh, it's these white people whining because someone's being racist against them, but they're not actually hurt because you can't hurt white people with racism, so it's faux outrage. But like that's not what people are mad about. Maybe some people are mad about that, but mostly what I've seen is people being mad at the inconsistency. Right. And that's the tweet from Iona that I read at the top was that like you have to be consistent here. It's so important to be consistent on this pernicious principle, because if you're not consistent, the white identitarians will immediately recognize that. Right. And that justifies their beliefs.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's also relevant to note that we don't have to keep talking about this, but just to respond to what you were saying, like the idea that a person who is white, I mean, we already talked about this, but how the idea that a person who's white is inherently an oppressor, like obviously it breaks down when you're, if when you say white, what you mean is rich person who lives in a city and like went to university and has a nice job. If that's your definition of white, then sure. But that's a terrible definition because there's tons of white people where that's not true. So just like you might say, oh, if you are saying racist things against black people because you think that because you're saying that they're criminals, it's the same logic as saying, oh, well, no, I'm not talking about all black people. I'm just saying the black people that are part of gangs and like the drug dealers and the rapists or whatever. Those people are criminals. But like, yeah, like a black university graduate is, they're probably totally fine.
Yeah, and you're missing, of course, that
my black friend is great.
Yeah, like, and you're not missing this, but like what that argument misses is that kind of logic and that kind of rhetoric actually does do damage to your ability to see the people that you're talking about as people and not as just a part of that group that you're talking about. Like, it actually does do damage to that tool that you have as a person. And that tool is really worth preserving because it's the only thing that can detect this pernicious idea.
Yeah, I mean, it's also interesting to note that, like, so sorry, I was trying to get to this earlier and I realized I just lost my train of thought.
Yeah.
But if you are, not your fault, if you are criticizing rich white people who have cushy jobs that live on the coast, then yeah, tweets about white people aren't going to hurt those people that much, probably. Or maybe it'll hurt them only marginally. But if you're criticizing white people in general, you could certainly hurt like poor working class unemployed white people in like the Rust Belt or whatever. And
yeah, but it's fine to hurt them because they voted for Trump.
Well, right, exactly. And it's not hard. This actually surprised me. I went and I was looking up suicide statistics. Don't ask why. And it turns out that the places by far with the highest suicide rates, or like, and the demographic that is committing suicide at the highest rate, is middle-aged white men in the middle of the country. And you know, it's hard to argue, like, from my part of why I was looking this up is from my perspective, the worst thing that can possibly happen to a person is that they commit suicide. Because to commit suicide is to say that your life is actually worse than death, right? At least if you're about to die of cancer, you presumably, like, mostly enjoyed your life up until the cancer. And the reason that dying of cancer is bad is because you die, the good thing ends. But with suicide, it's like, it wasn't even worth it. Like, you're at the point where, you know, all of the stuff before, like the death is, if anything, a suicide is like, it's almost like a good thing because you finally ended. I mean, I'm not saying it is, but it's almost like it is for the person who committed it. It's sort of like when someone goes through a divorce or gets out of a breakup and you're like, congratulations, because you know that it was bad for them. And so you're saying like, oh, sometimes the divorce is actually good because you got out of that bad situation. And so the idea that a person who commits suicide, or like a super large, like significant population of people committing suicide that is dominated by men by far, is dominated by white people a little bit, and is concentrated in these areas that lean conservative. It's like, oh, well, yeah, no one gives a crap about any of that. There's no way that any of these people could be hurt by anything that's happening here. But, you know, they're not hurt by globalization or by trade or by immigration or by reverse racism or feminism or anything like that. There's the only reason that they're offing themselves is probably just like they just suck. I don't know. They're just lazy. They're uncreative. Who knows why? Who even cares? Like, we shouldn't even look into that stuff. And I'm not saying that like feminists are making conservatives commit suicide en masse. I'm just saying that like these indirect effects that like build up in the culture. Yeah, and then it just goes back to what you were saying about you have to be consistent about that. Like, there's no way out of this if you're not going to be consistent. It just bolsters the identitarians on both sides.
You don't. Yeah, there's a motivation to not care about consistency as much, like, in these in-groups, because, you know, your allies know what you're talking about. They know that you're not talking about every single white person when you say white genocide or whatever, which Sarah Jeong, she's mentioned white genocide specifically like 3 or 4 times, like kill all white people, cancel white people.
Right.
Yeah, your allies know kind of what you mean there, and they understand the context, so it doesn't really matter. But, you know, we've talked about Twitter. Like, this is a public platform. This is a person who's working at the New York Times now. These are going to affect the culture. The majority of this country isn't necessarily political, right? Like, they don't understand this context. They don't understand these memes. They don't know that you don't actually mean all white people. So if you want to get those people on your side, you can't engage in this kind of language. Like, they're not gonna, like, this is the same point that I made, or that was made in this Twitter take at the top, was that, like, you're just not gonna convince the majority of people that you're not racist here. Yeah. Even if we totally concede that you aren't racist.
Well, it's also by their definition, not your definition.
Yeah.
It's the listener who decides whether you're racist or not. Not
so
you.
even if Ezra Klein is right, and it's both explainable and justified and not racist, you're just not going to convince most people of that. Because it's racist on its face. And we've already solved this problem with the masses. Like, they know about the pernicious idea, they know how to detect it, and they know when they see it. And this is just so obviously it.
Right. Yeah, sure. I mean, God, screw Sarah Jeong. I don't know. Whatever. I mean, I actually don't. I still don't really care about her that much. Like, I don't get this thing about like getting really angry at individual people. It's more like what she represents that bothers me, which is that like so many people rushing to support her and defend what she's saying. Like, why can you not just say, oh, okay, this one's bad? Like, Ezra Klein's fine, Sarah Jeong bad. Like, why? Why can we not do this? Okay, the only relating stuff that I think we had to mention were Sacha Baron Cohen's show.
Yeah. I don't have much to say about Sacha Baron Cohen's show except that you should watch it. Everybody should watch it. It's really good.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, I would say that the main thing that Sacha Baron Cohen is doing for me is he's turning me back into what I used to describe myself as like a SNL leftist.
Yeah.
Or a Daily Show leftist, where, you know, it's easy for me in my current zeitgeist to be complaining about the left and like the quote regressive left or control left or whatever you want to call it, and its excesses. But, you know, Sacha Baron Cohen roundly embarrassing conservative politicians who will apparently just say like literally whatever the fuck that someone wants to if they just say that they're from the gun lobby or
It's so
Israel
easy.
Or
What blows my mind is how easy it is for him to get these people to say whatever he wants them to. Like, you can look at, like, you can watch the show and like look at the garden path that he's leading them down and know where it's going, and they go even farther than you expect. Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's like, I get if, okay, well, the claim is that, okay, there's all this stuff that goes on behind the scenes. He like butters them up. He puts them like, you know, on the spot, like in an uncomfortable situation. They don't know what's going to happen. And then suddenly he just says some crazy stuff and they go along with it. And it's like, okay, in some of the cases, I get that. Like, you know, you're just reading a teleprompter and then maybe you read something and you're like, oh, wait a second. Like, what? But they're not doing that. They're going along with it for like 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And they're like holding up objects and they're like participating. They're adding their own comments and stuff. And there's the guy that's like running around with his pants down. You can't argue that you got tricked into that.
Yeah.
Like, no matter what the justification is, you're not going to run around with your pants down on TV.
A reasonable person would have just, a reasonable person would have stopped it like 5 different sections of content ago and been like, wait, what are we doing here? Like, what is this?
Yeah. It's like, that's something that I wouldn't do, even if I knew even if I knew it was a parody and like I wanted to be part of a parody, I still wouldn't take my pants down and like run around the camera. And I'm not like an elected official who thought it was for something serious. Who's like, I mean, come on, like it's absurd. And now I want to know, how many people did he really try this on where it just failed? Because if the hit rate is like, you know, it's one of these things where Jay Leno like accosts people on the street, and then a couple of them say some stupid things about you know, they can't find Utah on a map or something. That's
the only clip they play.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And it's like, okay, maybe they just interviewed 100 people and 10 people said something really stupid. But if Sacha Baron Cohen interviewed 20 people and 12 of them said something really stupid, then that's a real problem.
And they're all either public officials or they work for some lobby.
Right.
Yeah, like they're not just random ass people on the street.
Right.
A couple of them are, but
yeah. And so that's making me, you know, that started to make me more, you know, remember why I liked stuff like The Daily Show and Michael Moore and whatever when I was in high school. And that, there is obviously still problems on the right. I mean, it just happens to be the case that most of these fools that get suckered in are Republicans, especially like pro-gun or like anti-abortion type Republicans. And so I get that. And like, I want to be a part of that. It's just like, my frustration with the left is that was my team. Like, those were the guys that I went to get away from this stuff. And then now I'm seeing the same, you know, the Sarah Jongers and stuff on the left. Mm-hmm. I'm like, why can we not do this? Can we just have a group that's not doing this? Like, please. So hopefully that's where we're going. But in the short term, I'm not super optimistic about it, unfortunately. Yeah. I feel like this is how all of our shows end. Maybe I should stop doing this.
Well, yeah, I mean, we just got to have more conversations, right? That's what this show's for.
Yeah.
All right. That was Grokking Points. Follow us on Twitter, all those things.
Subscribe. Please like and subscribe. Please.
Yeah. Review us on wherever you can review us.
Store. Yeah. Do other things even do reviews? Like Pocket Cast or anything? It's just iTunes, right?
Yeah, I think it's just iTunes.
Okay. I don't even know what it's out of. Give us 5 stars. Give us 10 out of 10 on iTunes.
Yeah.
2 thumbs up on iTunes.